Darth Vader looked up at the round Senate building, his yellow gaze carefully hidden under the dark hood. He was shielding his presence in the Force, surrounding himself with a cloak of nothingness as he had done dozens of times before on his hunt for rebellious Jedi. Still, he did not count on his former master being unaware of his location. Even if he couldn't sense him, he was very capable in deciphering the vague messages about the future the Force delivered to him. It was Vader's experience that his future was shrouded in darkness. His enemies never seemed to know what his plans were. But even if Sidious couldn't see him directly, an event as grand as his own death would undoubtedly appear to him in a vision. The old man knew that his end was near. Vader wouldn't have it any other way. He turned away, melting into the crowd of scared people hurrying around, never looking up. He was lucky it was a rainy day, so he didn't stand out too much with his dark hood, but the confidence he carried with him probably squashed the illusion of him being one of them for any halfway decent observer. Darth Vader was a predator on the hunt. He had waited for 4 decades for this day, and so he took his time mapping out the building that he knew like the back of his hand. 3 times he had gone in, sometimes in disguise, sometimes just sticking to well-known paths that nobody ever used. 3 times he had been so close to the Sith Lord he could see the white in his eyes, but he did not strike yet. Some would call it indecisiveness, but he knew better. He did not want to let a drop of poison fall into his morning coffee. He did not want to aim a precise shot at him from hidden in a crowd. Not only would he foresee and avert any such attempt, it would also bring him no satisfaction. He needed to beat Sidious in the proper duel. If only he had not lost his fleet. He could have arrived on the planet as a conqueror, and make Sidious an irresistible offer of duel or life and death. The winner gets everything. Of course, he didn't think the other was so stupid as to believe Vader's order wouldn't eat him alive if a miracle happened and he lost, but it would have prevented the old man from running. As it was, he needed to take other precautions to make sure his final battle went without interruption. Where would he confront Sidious? There were only 3 possibilities: the Senate building, his apartment, or on the way between the 2 locations. The latter he dismissed immediately, too much opportunity to make a run for it. Security would be tight in his apartment, which could be a problem now that he came alone. Also, there could be plenty of hidden traps, and there was no reason to meet Sidious literally on his home turf. The Senate building it was then. In the back of his mind, there was a voice telling him it was too risky, that the number of civilian victims would be astronomical, especially when Sidious started to use human shields. But that voice was quickly shut up. The presence of the senators could even work in his favor. After all, it meant there would be more witnesses to his greatness. It wasn't like there was anyone important up there. Had was safe and the rest of the politicians were corrupt anyway. A small part of him even relished in the knowledge that Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and all the other rebel leaders would probably still be there. He certainly wouldn't cry for them if they appeared in the list of casualties. The where answered the when, now he just had to figure out the how. Something that instantly grabbed the Emperor's attention and forced him to reveal his true face in front of everyone, before the civilians had a chance to run. That was the real purpose of him sneaking into the place. He had prepared a series of detonators hidden away. In a few hours the Chancellor had a speech scheduled in front of the whole Senate. At that time Vader would be standing on the roof, his presence still hidden until he actually used the Force. But he wouldn't need to. He would simply flip a switch, the bombs would go off, and the roof would collapse onto the room full of people. While simple in design, the plan served its purpose brilliantly. Sidious would be forced to use the Force to keep the debris from squashing him, which meant that he would both reveal his powers to the senators, and be momentarily unable to defend himself with his hands full. Then, when Vader came down, attacking him with the lightsaber, he would be forced to put the debris down somewhere very fast, which meant he had to drop it on a bunch of senators, killing them. He would reveal his Force powers and his ruthlessness at the same time. After that, well, Vader didn't much care what happened after that. He always fought best when improvising anyway, and he was confident that he had surpassed his old master long ago. He would execute Sidious and declare Coruscant to be under the rule of the Separatists. Any clone-troopers who came to help would be hindered by the civilians, and without their leader, just killing a few hundreds of them should be enough to make them bow. In a few hours, his revenge would be complete. He would finally be the undisputed master of the Sith. XXX. Anakin jumped out of his starfighter and, ignoring the protests of the guards demanding he pay for parking there, sprinted out of the hangar. The adrenaline seemed to make his blood boil. Everything still seemed to be calm on Coruscant. At least nobody was running around screaming. The moment he arrived at the main street he stopped. He was here now. He knew he had to get to his father, but he knew neither where he was nor what he was supposed to do when he found him. According to Qui-Gon, his father had abandoned any kind of conscience he still had. His current goal would be to get rid of his former Sith master, which was sort of a good thing. It was what happened after that was reason for worry. Vader was after all the leader of the Separatists who were in possession of the biggest army in the galaxy, and controlled nearly all of it by now. If he slaughtered Sidious now, there was no saying what he would decide to do when the rush of victory hit him. Add to that he was going against a Sith Lord roughly 3 times as experienced as him all on his own, and his victory wasn't secure in the first place, and Anakin really had to get to him as soon as possible. But the former Jedi was cut off from the Force. He couldn't feel his father anywhere. His whole life he had always felt at least a feeble connection to him, but now it felt as if his father was dead. It felt as if Anakin himself was dead and just wandering the world as a ghost, disconnected from everything and everyone. The former Jedi had to swallow a rush of hopelessness. If only Obi-Wan. But then he shook his head. Time to try it the old-fashioned way. Anakin marched into the next bar that happened to have access to the holonet. He searched the local news first. There was nothing about an assassination attempt on the Chancellor, no separatist attacks, no trail of chaos and destruction that he could follow. Dang, he muttered. Anakin continued to carefully hack into the security records of the Senate building and other sites the Chancellor was likely to visit. They hadn't noted any breach either. Anakin was sure that his father was here. Qui-Gon had told him so, but where exactly was he hiding and why? Skywalker. Anakin whirled around, cursing himself for his inattention at not putting his hood up. His face was well known in the entire Republic. Of course it would be only a matter of time until someone recognized him. But the man facing him with a bewildered stare was, fortunately, not very likely to be one of Palpatine's spies. "Senator Organa," he said, his shoulders slumping a bit in relief. Then he saw the senator's hand wander to a blaster at his belt, shock melting to disgust and wariness on his face. "You have a lot of nerve to show your face here again," he growled. "After what you did to the Jedi to your friends." Anakin flinched. For a moment he had forgotten about Order 66, and that for the world at large, he was still a traitor. He didn't know what shocked him more, the look of hatred on the senator's face, one of Padme's friends who he knew to be a good and honest man, or the fact that the massacre of his fellow Jedi had completely slipped his mind in his worry over his own family. "Senator, I can explain. I know that we're losing the war, everyone knows it, and I was certainly one of the first to judge the Chancellor for refusing the capitulation the Senate voted on. But then I remember what you did, you and your separatist friends, and I can't help but think he's right to refuse to bow to you." Anakin's face became ashen. "Senator, I never gave that order. I would never do something like that. It was Palpatine's fault. Don't try to deny it. Everyone saw your face. That was a recording from when I told the council about Palpatine's plan, when I tried to warn them." "Oh? Then why is it that you are alive while the rest of the Jedi are dead?" That was like a slap to the face. Anakin felt desperation, shame and anger rise in him. He took a deep breath, trying to release his feelings into the Force, but the Force was not there anymore. He was only alive because he'd resigned the Jedi before the order was executed, and because he'd been under Vader's protection. That didn't sound suspicious at all. "I made a couple of mistakes," he admitted, mistakes with horrible consequences. "I know that I carry part of the blame, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I am not the monster you make me out to be. I'm trying to help." "Help? What could you possibly do to help?" "Darth Vader is on Coruscant. He's here to kill the Chancellor and probably to conquer the planet as well." Organa paled at that, but Anakin wasn't finished. "You've all been deceived, Senator. Palpatine is a Sith Lord, and he was working together with Count Dooku. This whole war was just a means to an end for them to get more power. When Vader found out about it, he killed Dooku, and now he's here to kill Dooku's master." That wasn't entirely true, but he didn't have the time to explain his father's twisted mind to Organa. "You said it yourself, Palpatine has been in office for far too long. He's refusing to give up power even when his government is about to crumble and his planet about to be conquered. He should have resigned years ago. The order that made the clones turn against the Jedi, it wasn't a virus created by Vader, it was issued by an inhibitor chip implanted into their heads as embryos. He planned to wipe out my order a decade ago. So now you have teamed up with him to kill the Chancellor." "No," Anakin said, and suddenly, what he had to do became so clear to him. "I'm here to stop him. The Chancellor has to be punished for his crimes, but he will be judged by a council, by the people he wronged. Vader is no longer in control of himself, and I may be the only one able to stop him." To say these words was harder than he would have ever imagined. Palpatine was not only responsible for the death of hundreds of nameless Jedi. He was responsible for the death of the Jedi, of his master Obi-Wan. Anakin had a fierce desire for revenge himself. There had been a point where he believed himself to be capable of killing the man no matter what. Even if he were helpless or unarmed, he wouldn't have hesitated. But that was not the way of the Jedi, and more importantly, it wasn't what Obi-Wan would have wanted. If Anakin ever joined the Force like Qui-Gon did and met his former master there, how could he look into his eyes if he succumbed to his anger because of him? Even when judged properly, Palpatine would still receive a death sentence. Justice would be served. But Anakin wouldn't be the one carrying out the order, he would be distanced from it. The blood would not be on his hands. At least, not literally. Organa seemed to hesitate. "You know, if he just made an official demand, the entire planet would probably fall over themselves to give the Chancellor up to him. He's conquered the entire Middle Ring, and his army is moving forward ruthlessly. You have no idea how scared everyone is. Palpatine wouldn't surrender no matter what. And he is a Sith, even without controlling the clones. He's too strong for anyone to attempt to force him to do it. Even if they did, Vader doesn't want a prisoner, he wants a duel, and neither care about civilian casualties. And if he has Palpatine, what then? I doubt he'll just walk away from the planet. How are you going to stop him? Do you even know where he is now? No, he admitted. But if I do nothing, there's no saying how many good people will die in the crossfire. If you help me, maybe Vader will still win. Maybe the Republic will still fall. But as it stands, that's going to happen anyway, and at least like this, I can protect you and others from the worst of the backlash. It took Organa a couple of minutes to think over that, during which Anakin started to worry if their heated discussion might attract any unwanted attention from the other customers. Fine, I'll help you, the senator said at last. There's a meeting going on in half an hour. I suppose I could smuggle you in. If you stay close to where the Chancellor is, you'll probably run across Vader on the way. Thank you, Anakin said and breathed in relief. I'm almost sure I will regret this, Organa muttered, but he finally let go of his blaster. Anakin was eerily reminded of Obi-Wan, which sent another stab of pain through him. Strangely enough, he didn't have a bad feeling about what was to come. Only, he felt he should have. He hadn't realized how much he relied on the premonition the Force granted him. To walk to a dangerous mission like this, completely blind and with no guidance, how did normal people ever endure that? XXX. The detonation shook the entire building. Darth Vader stood at the rim of the big hole in the dome, looking down at the chaos beneath him. He smiled as the sounds of screams reached his ears. Looking down, he saw that the debris had buried quite a few people under it. Dozens of pods had been destroyed, and the smell of blood and dust was heavy in the air. There was one small island in all the chaos that seemed untouched though. The large chunk of stone that had crashed down right in the middle where the Chancellor stood had been split in two, both parts falling down harmlessly at his sides. Vader discarded the mental shields keeping his Force presence hidden, and with one precise jump, he landed right in front of the Sith Lord, his red lightsaber drawn. For just a moment the old man seemed to glare at him before he jumped back, barely being missed by Vader's opening strike. Your ruling days are over, Chancellor Palpatine, or should I say, Darth Sidious. Vader declared in a loud, booming voice that was heard even over the many screams around him. If the Sith was upset that his secret was blown, he didn't show it. I was wondering when you would find the courage to face me, Lord Vader, he mocked him. It took you long enough. I was busy with more important matters, he returned unconcerned. The noise of dozens of clone-troopers rushing to the help of the senators could be heard in the distance. Undoubtedly Sidious had them positioned beforehand, sensing that something would happen today, but not knowing exactly what. He had not counted on the room coming down on him, debris blocking all the exits. The clones couldn't use bombs to get through to them in fear of hurting the senators. Well, he could help with that. Vader raised his arms, and dozens of tons of stone and steel rose to the air, as if they had decided that gravity suddenly didn't matter anymore. The mass started to float towards Sidious. From the distance it probably looked as if he was hurling it all at the old man at once, but as that would produce too much dust for cover, in reality Vader commanded only single large rocks to accelerate at the last moment, and shot at the Sith. That way, while the Chancellor dodged the first few, when they came faster and faster he was forced to use his own powers at least to redirect them. For a moment the two Sith faced each other. Sidious wore a twisted grin at having successfully negated all of Vader's attacks, but he only returned the look with a smug smile. It was then that the old man noticed that all around them whispers came up as people had witnessed him using the Force to save himself. Sidious's look of triumph morphed into one of black hatred, and his eyes flashed yellow. You will regret that, he growled. The next moment, blue lighting shot from his fingertips. Vader raised his lightsaber to block the attack and grinned widely. Now that all pretenses were gone, the real fight could begin. Behind the two Sith Lord, buried under several inches of debris and dust, laid the motionless form of a Jedi Knight, dirty blonde hair crusted over with blood from a head injury, his lightsaber having rolled ahead and out of reach. For the moment nobody noticed his vulnerable body lying there, but that was only a matter of time. Darth Maul watched as the little girl typed at what looked like lightspeed, letters and numbers dancing across the display far too fast for him to read, let alone understand. Already she had managed to get the ship ready to navigate again. They had made a reset on a few droid squads to get their basic functions online and power up the lasers and ion cannons. The ship still had taken a lot of damage from having remained completely without energy for so long, but it would do. Maul was still skeptical. He had a suspicion who the girl was. The coincidence was just too great, but at the same time it didn't make any sense. Even if Furno had somehow survived his master's attack, which should have been impossible in itself, how could she suddenly find herself in a human body? She could be a particularly advanced robot or even cyborg, but then why would she chose such a small form? Why would she try to deceive him, pretending to remember nothing? But that didn't fit. An hour ago she had stopped her work and whined to him about her stomach hurting, and if maybe she could have some medicine. He had to explain to her that she was probably just hungry. At first he thought she wanted an excuse to sneak away, but when he'd brought her food she'd actually eaten it. More like wolfed it down, really. Then she had looked up at him with those bright green eyes and a big grin, as if he'd served her birthday cake, not dried beef. So, not a robot then. Considering she had probably been in charge of investigating Order 66, Furno would have the knowledge necessary to create tiny chips to store a great amount of data, and implant them in a human body. But again, why use a child for that? If she was after a longer lifespan, she could have chosen another race. Maybe it was a clone body, one created from scratch. Not entirely finished obviously, as it wasn't grown up, but with the blackout it had awoken prematurely. That seemed to be the best explanation. Maul almost dared to hope that the child didn't carry the mind of the Executor in her, but her binary abilities seemed to prove otherwise. If her body had been bred during a short time with the help of growth hormones, it would explain her ridiculous hunger, as she kept asking for more food. But if that was indeed Furno sitting in the brain of that girl with the bright green eyes and the short curly brown hair and the ridiculously big Admiral's shirt and jacket, then why was she so oblivious to the world around her? Furno had been too prideful to accept any kind of critique. If one even dared suggest that she might have made a mistake, she would unleash a storm of numbers and tables on you. That proved that no, her calculations had been perfect, thank you very much, no advice needed. Any failures occurring despite that it had a statistically negligible probability, and it wasn't her fault the enemy was having a lucky day. Not even when it happened again and again, because statistical probability didn't really matter for GD, who had the Force on his side. Even Vader made a habit out of laughing in the face of statistical probability. Els on the other hand asked plenty of questions to learn, and when she voiced her opinion about something or another, she was quick to surrender to Maul's arguments if they were sound, and it didn't seem to bother her to be corrected. If anything, it made her determined to learn even more. The girl showed a range of emotions that Furno would never be able to project, and while she was a bit weird, Maul didn't really feel like he was talking to a droid when he was with her. After the navigation and weapon systems had been reinstalled, Maul had seriously considered just killing the brat. If there was a save of Furno in that little head, it wouldn't do to let her live. It would have been all for nothing and he couldn't allow that. But as more time passed and he watched her closely, he came to the conclusion that Bells really was not like Furno. There were some similarities, but she was just a lot more innocent, carefree, sort of like the AI had been when she had still been the mother. Only she was a child, eager to learn more and having fun at playing with programs. Maybe, the Zabrak mused, the AI hadn't bothered to download herself into the chip of an unfinished clone. Maybe she had only started doing so when Vader attacked her system, and naturally, in 30 seconds it was impossible to save all her files on it. Her basic program had made it, resulting in Bells having a deep understanding of everything to do with software, but little of anything else. Everything she had learned since becoming head AI of the fleet and thus the characters she formed were only present in bits and pieces. Recordings and data that would make up her memory were lacking completely. It would not surprise Maul to find out Furno had deemed that most important part of the mind's second priority to the knowledge of how to adjust a hyperdrive generator. Maul had actually liked the mother before she had gone off to become the evil space nanny from Heck, so he had reined in his bloodlust and steered his hand from throttling that tiny neck. They would meet up with Lord Vader. Ultimately, the fate of the child lay in his hands. "We're coming out of hyperspace right about now," said Child declared in just that moment, and Maul looked up. The stars morphed from long white stripes to single points, and a moment later, planets and moons and ships filled the window of the bridge. "Wow," Bells exclaimed with glowing eyes, "so many ships." Indeed, there were hundreds of ships in the area. Several star destroyers could be seen, accompanied by squadrons of cruisers, bombers and fighters. "Wow, we're getting weird signals," Bells exclaimed, pointing to an angry yellow blinking light. "That'll be my brother, Fierl," Maul said, and moved to answer the call, giving his code and ID. "We're not scheduled to arrive here, so they're suspicious. I'll have it cleared up in a minute, and then the fleet can unite once again." "I thought you wanted to contact your master as soon as possible," Bells mused aloud. "He is your master too," the Zabrak chided her softly, "never forget that. It's only thanks to him that you're alive." Bells frowned, lost in thought for a moment. "But," she said then, "isn't it also thanks to him that the blackout happened that almost killed us both?" "That almost killed me," he corrected her. "Your life was essentially kick-started by it." They had no time to further argue the issue as Maul had to answer the call of the other Star Destroyer and organize the fleet. With a single ship he couldn't be of much help to his master, and he didn't want to leave Bells alone and unsupervised on the Executor either. So instead, he would assemble the entire fleet and bring them to Coruscant. It was time for the Separatists to conquer the core. XXX. Darth Vader laughed as he redirected his enemy's lightning, which promptly caused another wall to collapse right onto the incoming rescue team of clonotroopers. He waited until the screams stopped. Only then did he lift the debris with the Force, and used it to further attack Sidious. The old man had to draw his own lightsaber after all. He was no longer holding back, betraying his age by jumping through the hull and dodging Vader's missiles, performing all kinds of acrobatic acts that by all means should be impossible. Even Vader was surprised at his agility. He had never really trained much in combat with his former master, who preferred to sit on his throne and do paperwork the whole day, while he was the one to go out and wreak havoc amongst his enemies. Either he hadn't wanted to reveal his true expertise, knowing the day would come when his apprentice would betray him, or he really had been weakened greatly in that duel with the GD Masters. It didn't matter now anymore. Vader's grip on the Force was stronger than his, which basically meant he was the only one throwing stuff at him, as it was all too easy for him to wrench control of the rubble from Sidious if he tried the same. That was good too, because that way Vader merely had to stand in the middle of the hull, not bothering to hunt down the annoying Sith Lord while attacking from range. The few times the old man dared to close in on him, Vader showed him that his raw strength and skill with the lightsaber was not to be underestimated either. The whole building shook as their fight continued. The senators, not too wounded, had all fled by now. The roof was no more, and large parts of the outer walls began to crumble as well. Soon the view to the streets was open to them, and more screams could be heard as civilians were added to the mix. It was just as well for Vader. The more witnesses to his victory, the better. "You really are a monster, aren't you?" Sidious asked rhetorically as their sabers were clashing. "A shame we had to meet as enemies." Vader narrowed his eyes, feeling slightly insulted. How dare the Sith chat with him while in the middle of a battle? Did he underestimate his power? Did he really think he could afford to spend less than 100% of his concentration on the task at hand? Vader pushed him away and Sidious flipped in the air, landing not quite gracefully on a ledge above him. "You think the dark side your friend, your ally, but it has consumed you. You are drunk on your own power, barely a shadow of yourself. What does that say about you when this shadow is able to defeat you?" He growled back. Vader felt the power pulse in his veins, and it was exhilarating. He could see how Sidious could mistake the large grin on his face as a result of being controlled by the dark, but really, it was just the adrenaline. Ever since he died, there was no difference between being filled with the light or the dark side, as long as it was power. Well, either that or he had simply forgotten how the light side felt, it being ages since he last used it. "You think yourself a god," Sidious hissed hatefully, "and you have power, but you don't have a vision, no ambition. You conquered the whole galaxy, and for what? Not to make a difference, not to write history, not even for the sake of ruling. You did it so you could forever stay a child throwing a tantrum. All that power, it's wasted on you. Shut the criff up and let me rip out your throat." Vader shouted, and with another wave of his hand, made the stone crumble under Sidious's feet. But the old man merely laughed, and dodged to the side, retreating to the battlefield that had once been the Senate building. He wasn't even trying to attack anymore, and it made Vader furious. He knew that tone, that voice. Sidious was playing his mind games with him. That he even dared trying to do that was enough to make his anger spike, but there was also a tiny moment of uncertainty. Sidious wouldn't try to talk to him if he didn't think he'd found a weakness to aim for. But Vader had no weakness, there was nothing Sidious could hold against him. "There's so much anger in you," the Sith Lord continued silkily. "Tell me, why do you hate me so much? What did I ever do to you?" Vader moved to grab his throat in a force hold, but his next words shocked him enough to lose concentration for a second. "Did I kill your wife? Did I kill your child?" Sidious grinned, looking as if he was talking about the weather. "Was it me who turned you into a Sith? You were a Jedi before, weren't you? Did I make you kill your friends and comrades? Your master? I bet you wish," he growled, unwilling to show how close his words were hitting. What was he playing at? It was impossible for him to know these things. It hadn't even happened in this world. "I know," Sidious said as if reading his mind, "because that's what I plan to do, Anakin Vader." "Really? Did you think nobody would ever find out?" The Sith Lord halted in his movement, cold sweat running down his neck. "What do you mean?" he snapped, resisting the urge to look around. A couple of clone-troopers and senators were still around, but they were all too hurt to listen or unconscious. "I know who you are. I know where you came from, or should I say when." Now it was Sidious who was grinning as he saw Vader's shocked expression. "Really? I am surprised nobody noticed it earlier. Your great resemblance aside, you share the same name, the same birthday, you never really bothered to hide it all that much. Maybe you were counting on your presence being so different in the Force. That did manage to mislead me for quite some time. But with your future always clouded as if fate had no hold onto you, as if you were the only one capable of changing the predetermined timeline, while at the same time you always managed to cross my plans. You knew every detail and could adapt so well to my reactions, as if you knew me better than anyone as Sith as powerful as you. Of course you had to be my apprentice. You didn't manage to kill me in your time, so you came back to try again." Sidious took another step to the side, still smiling at the stunned Vader. Then he leaned down to grab a random unconscious person by the neck, holding his lightsaber at the man's throat, as if he were a hostage. Vader was still somewhat overwhelmed that Sidious had known for how long. But he was, and only felt mild irritation at the thought that the older Sith would think a hostage of all things would do him any good in this situation. That was until Sidious lifted the man's head, showing the blood-crusted face that was a mirror image, as slightly younger, of himself. "Now tell me, what would happen to you if I were to eradicate your existence the way you wanted to eradicate mine?" Vader felt his heart miss a beat. What the Force was Anakin doing here? And how had he not sensed his presence? Then it came back to him, of course, Anakin had distanced himself from the Force, and by doing so his presence had vanished. Maybe Sidious was right after all. Maybe he had let himself go, too drunken on his own power, when he hadn't even noticed the face of his younger self amongst the victims of his initial attack. Rage welled up in Vader, but he had enough of a mind to contain it, before making any hasty movements that might cause Sidious to slit the boy's throat. Though, a bitter part of him whispered, it wouldn't be too much of a loss if the boy was so dense as to come here, defenseless as he was without the Force. Vader raised his chin, looking at Sidious defiantly. "You are wrong," he declared. "Oh? Don't try to deceive me, Lord Vader. I recognize a creation of mine when I see it. You are wrong about the purpose of my travel," he clarified, deceptively calm. "It is not that I failed to kill you. No, the memory of your death, pathetic as it was an endless source of enjoyment for me these past few years." He was leaning forward, that large crazy grin almost splitting his face in two. "You forget that I am the chosen one. I brought balance to the Force. You became a Sith." Sidious protested hotly. "That's right. What better balance is there than to destroy everything and build it anew? It is true, I killed my master. I killed many other Jedi too. And in the end, I killed you. I did not choose to come here and do it all over again. No, this life is a gift for me. A gift made by the living Force itself. And do you know what that means?" Vader grinned, a maniac glint to his eyes. "It means I have all the right to act like a child throwing a tantrum because this universe is my playground. It belongs to me and I can do with it whatever the heck I want. I don't want to kill you because you made me a Sith, because you made me stronger and taught me how to get rid of all those pesky bonds that made me weak. I want to kill you because it was so much fun the first time around and I want to do it again." The younger Sith Lord had now almost reached Sidious. Pure evil glinted in his eyes as he stepped even closer, not blinking when Sidious took a step back, dragging Anakin with him, and singeing his skin with the saber. "You want to know what happens if you kill Anakin? I'll tell you. Absolutely nothing. That pathetic boy is completely unimportant, a placeholder, nothing more. He was fun to play around with because the irony, but ultimately, I don't need him. His life has no meaning." Sidious looked torn for just a moment, but it passed quickly, and his usual smirk got in place again. "Is that so?" he answered smoothly. He dared to take his eyes off Vader, looking at the young man he was holding. How interesting to hear. It was only then that Vader noticed Anakin was no longer unconscious, probably having woken up from the pain of his singed throat. The former Jedi was staring up at him wide eyes, a terrible storm of emotions waging in his eyes. He had heard Vader's last words all too well. "I don't need him. His life has no meaning." The words echoed in Anakin's head, and something ugly raised its head somewhere deep inside of him. He had known it, he had known his father was gone, swallowed up by the dark side, that even the last piece of him that made him good, the love for his family, had lost any meaning to him, and still, hearing the words coming from him, his father, it hurt. It hurt more than anything else he'd ever had to endure. Through all of it, through peace and war, through love and hate, his father had always curbed his plans around him, had never dismissed his voice, and put everything aside to talk or fight or help him when he came. Even though he was dark, even though he was crazy, he had loved Anakin. And even if it had brought him more pain than anything else, Anakin had enjoyed knowing he was the center of his father's world. Hate, he could have accepted. Strange as it sounded, but Anakin had decided long ago for himself that it was better to be hated by your loved ones than to lose them. He had risked much in bringing Padme to the Sith, and he was so glad she had accepted his choice, but he wouldn't have acted differently if she hadn't. He had fought for his children, even knowing that if it left him that weak, there was a good chance Vader would take them in and raise them himself, raising them to hate their own father. Even Obi-Wan Anakin wished so much he would have just killed Palpatine before he could make that blasted order, even if it meant abandoning the Jedi way, even if his master would never forgive him for it. He had known about the order, had known about the clones, but at that time Sidious's true identity had still been a secret to him. Still, it had taken him great effort not to charge blindly into the Senate and kill the man himself, even now that it wouldn't bring back his master. Anakin had accepted that by choosing to remain a Jedi, if not in name but in heart, his father might grow to hate him. He could have endured that. But what his father was showing him now was not hatred. It was indifference, and somehow, that was much, much worse. His father did not care if he lived or died. For a moment the eyes of the two Anakins met. There was surprise there for a second, but the emotion did not quite suffice to cloud the disdain in the Sith's eyes. It wasn't a bluff. His father looked down at his weak son, force blind, and at the blade of an enemy Sith, and he was disgusted by him. That moment, something in Anakin broke. As terrible as the moment was though, Anakin had been trained excessively to act under stress. Using the tense atmosphere that seemed to stun the two adversaries, Anakin stepped on the old man's foot behind him heavily, and in a moment of surprise, rammed him his elbow in the face. Sidious did not see that coming. Maybe the blind spot Anakin provided in the Force included his future as well. Maybe Sidious had shared Vader's opinion about Anakin's dismissible strength, but whatever the reason, the young man managed to free himself. Out of instinct he tried to call his lightsaber to his hand, only to realize that it would not come. He might not be much at the moment, Sidious muttered with dark amusement, while Vader tensed up, ready to start up their duel again. But with a little training, I'm sure he could surpass you, Vader. Don't you dare, Vader hissed coldly, but Sidious merely smiled and kept talking, half turning to the former Jedi. You heard it yourself, my boy. He doesn't care about you. He would sacrifice your life without a second thought. You don't owe him anything. He's just going to destroy everything you love. As if you're any better. Anakin shouted hotly. Because of you, Obi-Wan is dead. Are you sure that is my fault? And even if it were, don't you think Lord Vader would have had the means to save him if you wanted to spare you the pain? Vader looked furious, but he didn't object, even as Sidious turned his questioning gaze on him. Anakin felt cold. Think about it, Anakin. Think about everything bad that ever happened in your life. Can you recall a single time when Vader didn't have something to do with it? He couldn't. That time his best friend had died, murdered by slave traders. When he'd almost lost Padme and Obi-Wan on Geonosis. The endless nights lying awake because he had to keep so many secrets, his correspondence with his father, Order 66, his dream about Padme dying. Leaving the Jedi. Vader had always been there, in the background. You're not my marionette, you're his. Aren't you sick of it? He was. But, he was there during all the bad times, he admitted, and maybe even caused some of them. But he was also there during the good times. Being freed as a slave. Being saved from the huts. The numerous times he had spared his life during the war and kept secret about, and in his own twisted way even supported, his marriage to Padme. He'd shown him how to save his wife and children. You say I don't owe him anything. That is simply not true, Anakin whispered more to himself. I owe him my life. Sidious just looked at him coldly. He is not even your father. Anakin's eyes widened and he stared at the old man. What? Enough, Vader whispered, standing just a few feet away, but Sidious kept talking. He's been lying to you for your whole life. Do you want to know the truth? Do you want to know about your true origins? Your true fate? I can tell it to you. I said that's enough. Vader shouted, and with a whip of red light, he slashed at the other Sith, who had to jump back to avoid being sliced in half. Anakin merely stared at him. Why was he reacting this aggressively? Sidious's words couldn't possibly be true. The very notion was ridiculous. Of course Vader was his father. Who else could it possibly be? But the Sith Lord was fuming with rage, the dark side coiling around him so powerfully even Anakin with his almost non-existent senses felt a shiver run down his spine. Why was this upsetting him so much? It was rather predictable that Sidious would try to pit them against each other. They had even spoken about the possibility before, and besides, hadn't his father admitted just a minute ago that Anakin didn't mean anything to him anyway? Then why was he so angry? Ironically, Sidious's words meant to drive the two away from each other, lightened a tiny spark of hope in Anakin's chest. His father may have lost control, but that didn't mean he couldn't get it back. The former Jedi threw himself to the side as Vader summoned a true whirlwind of stone missiles, all targeted at the other Sith Lord. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe his father directed it at him on purpose, but between all the rubble suddenly flying around, Anakin spotted his lightsaber. He managed to grab it out of the air. The chaos had evolved to a small hurricane. Most of the rubble missed Anakin, on purpose, he hoped, but he was hit a few times as well, and had to seek refuge in a hole left from a ripped-out senator's pod. Sidious was at the edge of the storm, trying to pile up large chunks of stone in front of him to protect himself. They were usually ripped from his grasp quite fast. Anakin looked down at the lightsaber in his hand, then back to Sidious. He didn't have the Force, he didn't have a chance against the Sith Lord. Or did he? Palpatine had been unprepared for his attack when he had freed himself from his grip. Anakin didn't have premonition on his side, the power to know when his enemy would strike next. But could it be that during to him being cut off from the Force, that he was Force blind as well as invisible? Maybe it didn't matter that his reflexes were reduced to human standards, if the other Force sensitives couldn't predict his movements either. Sidious would still be stronger and faster than him, but if he could catch him off guard, that didn't have to matter. Slowly an idea formed in his head. XXX, come to me, Anakin, I can give you all the knowledge you desire, Darth Sidious said, barely loud enough for the boy to hear him. Skywalker had retrieved his lightsaber, but he was looking indecisively between the two Sith Lords, as if unsure who to turn it on. Finally the boy took a deep breath and took a step towards Sidious. What are you doing? Vader barked out, the whirlwind of destruction around him still moving fast but not attacking. Sidious saw the conflict in the boy, in his eyes, in his stiff posture, even though he still couldn't feel a thing from him. He was cloaking his strong presence with an amazing expertise, almost as if it was unconscious, unintentional even. I'm sorry, Anakin whispered, giving his older self such a heartbroken look. But you're not yourself anymore. I don't know who you are. I don't know anything anymore. Sidious couldn't help a traitorous small smile. He knew he'd do it, he would get the younger Skywalker on his side at last, and the stupid boy would destroy himself. Anakin, Vader growled in a warning. He looked like he wanted nothing more, then ripped them both to shreds, but Anakin was too close to Sidious already. Maybe it really would have no effect on him if his younger self died, but he was certainly attached to the boy. Sidious could use that. I'm sorry, father, the boy muttered as he stepped next to Sidious. Suddenly there was an explosion of anger and hatred rolling off his counterpart. All doubts of maybe this being a setup vanished as Sidious saw Vader's reaction, heard his roar of fury. Anakin winced, taking a step back in fear. The dark side was so powerful, Sidious was surprised it didn't force the young one to his knees all by itself. The Sith Lord prepared to erect a force shield to keep the madly spiraling rubble from hitting him. And then out of nowhere there was a lightsaber at his throat. "That's enough," Anakin said, voice only trembling slightly. "The fight ends here." Vader, who had been just 1 second away from crushing them both, halted in the middle of directing his dark power towards him. Sidious was shocked for a moment. How could this happen? He had not sensed this coming. Skywalker's indecision and desperation had been so plain on his face, he had ignored the fact that he still couldn't feel a thing about him from the Force. Vader's outrage at seeing his younger self turn against him had been real, he was sure of that, but the boy had played him. Sidious had dismissed him, allowed him to get behind him, and now he was paying the price. "Stupid boy," he muttered, staring hatefully at the blue blade. "You could have killed me with that move. Now, it's too late." He turned around quickly, his own lightsaber flashing. Then, everything happened very fast. Anakin raised his lightsaber to block Sidious's incoming strike. At the same time Vader attacked. Being too far away he reached out with the Force and commanded the very ground they stood upon, which began to move. Sidious had a split second of warning as the Force urged him to move, and he stepped to the side. That forced him to break from Skywalker, who was still standing strong. Sidious turned to block the incoming spikes of sharpened metal Vader sent to him. He felt that if those managed to hit him it would be over. But even as he succeeded to overcome that danger, the Force failed to warn him of the one at his back. In the moment of intense battle, Sidious relied fully on his Force senses, and when faced with an opponent, even one of lesser skill, his actions he couldn't predict. That was a grave mistake. Anakin reacted by instinct as he saw the opening in Sidious's defense. It wasn't the instinct strengthened from the Force, it was one honed from years of training. There was just one slash, the lightsaber meant to be able to cut through steel barely feeling any resistance, and suddenly the Sith's lightsaber was sailing through the air. The sudden shock of pain prevented Sidious from reacting fast enough, even as the Force was screaming at him. The next barrage of spikes formed of stone hit him square on, and he was thrown backwards as his body was pierced at multiple points. Then the pain hit him. Sidious let out a screech, and as he raised his arms his eyes widened in horror, seeing the two blackened stumps where his hands used to be. Hateful yellow eyes moved from the boy who seemed to be surprised by his own actions to his older counterpart, on whose face a grin was slowly spreading. Things certainly didn't look in his favor. RT-7958 was a fairly new droid. No, actually, that was not true. He was a fairly old droid who had only been recently activated after a rather thorough memory wipe. He was a commander droid, the highest ranking one on the superstar destroyer Executor, and the first one who received any signals from the lesser commandeering droids through the ship when there was a problem. Honestly, that was not what he had been built for. With such a massive ship, there should be a droid with a better processor or an AI or something. He had barely enough capabilities to sort through all the messages frequently sent to him. In his humble opinion, that was some shoddy planning, but who was he to argue? Just now he received another transmission from the other end of the ship. Commander?" A distinctly mechanical voice asked. "This is QW-345 from the hyper-regulation. I'm kinda confused here. What is the problem?" RT-7958 asked, no longer exasperated. "One of my droids reports a funny-looking box sticking to the B sector reactor. That was one of 5 reactors fueling the hyperdrive. It looks a bit, explosive. Do we have a self-destruction battle plan or something?" "Negative," RT-7958 answered as he was not aware of such thing. "No self-destruction plan. Take the box and analyze it." "Roger that, sir. I already sent someone to collect it, and also to look at the other 4 reactors just to be safe. Problem is they haven't come back." RT-7958's processor began working faster. If someone placed explosives at all the minor reactors and managed to get them to go off at the same time, it would pretty much have the same effect as hitting the main reactor, without having to go through all the tight security around the latter. Chances were pretty good that this was an enemy sabotaging their ship. He had to contact the general and organize an extensive search to find out how the intruder had managed to get on board. RT-7958 raised his hand for the transmission button to give his commands to QW-345, but suddenly his arm wouldn't move. No matter how often he sent the command to his limb, it was frozen in the middle of the air. There was a strange, harsh breathing sound behind RT-7958 as the door slid open. He had never heard such a sound before, and if he had been organic, the chilling sound would have made him shiver. RT-7958 turned around his head a full 180 degrees, and caught sight of something that seemed to be a massive black droid. The figure was a towering black and silver durasteel armored behemoth with a smooth helmet over a black breathing mask with large, insect-like eyes. The battle droid, for it could be nothing else, was holding up one hand, the inner workings of the steel contraption clearly visible through the lack of exoskeleton, in his direction. The gesture itself didn't look all that threatening, but the fact that RT-7958's arm was suddenly crumbling for no apparent reason, the durasteel snapping and distorting like a twig, erased all question whether or not this was an enemy. Attention, attention, RT-7958 called out, activating his channel to the bridge. Before he could give any further warning through, the hand wandered a bit higher, and suddenly there was such a high pressure around his head. The hand closed to a fist and RT-7958 was no more. XXX. At last, Vader muttered, taking his time to step forward, his red glowing lightsaber held loosely at his side. The whirlwind of destruction around him was slowly dying down, but Anakin wasn't fooled. There was nothing calm about his father in that moment, just a quiet, hungry expectation before the beast went in for the kill. He still couldn't quite believe this was happening. It's quite funny, Vader said in an almost cheerful manner, looking down at his foe, how similar you look to Dooku now. I ended his life in much the same way as I'm going to end yours now. Anakin chanced to look at the older Sith Lord. He shouldn't have. Darth Sidious was a mess. Vader's last attack had pierced his body at multiple spots, drenching his Dark Senator's tunic in blood. There was something white sticking out of his side, looking suspiciously like a rib. His legs were trembling weakly, unable to support his weight any longer as he was lying on the ground, still staring somewhat numbly at the two blackened stumps. That's what made Anakin's stomach churn the most. He'd acted on instinct, utilizing years of training to disable his opponent. He'd never hurt someone this severely though. The smell of burned flesh made him gag. And yet, Sidious must have caught the way he looked to the side guiltily. Suddenly he was wailing, backing away from Vader in fear, and shouting for Anakin to help him, to save him. It was pathetic. Try throwing lightning at us now, Vader mocked, and the former Jedi couldn't help but share his satisfaction. Then the Sith Lord raised his saber, aiming to end it all. The red blade was already fizzing down when at the last moment, Anakin called out. Stop it. Miraculously, Vader did stop, the blade just an inch from Sidious's throat. Slowly the man looked up, shooting a dark look at his younger self. You already got to cut off his hands, he said. I get to cut off his head. No, Anakin managed to get out. He threw a look at the beaten Sith. He wanted to see it dead so much, but that was not the Jedi way. No, don't kill him. He must answer for his crimes, but he will do it facing military court. It was impossible to say which Sith looked more incredulous at this declaration. Excuse me. You heard me, Anakin said, finding his resolve. He is too severely hurt to be a danger anymore. Let's just arrest him. I am head of the military court of the Confederation, and I judge him guilty, to be executed immediately. Vader snapped and raised his lightsaber anew. Father. Anakin all but begged, laying a hand on the older man's shoulder to stop him. Please. You're letting your anger consume you. Well yes, that's what being a Sith is all about. You have to come back, he insisted. The fighting is over, the war is over. Now is the time to remember why you did it all. For a moment it seemed as if Vader was going to argue the issue, but then, unexpectedly even for his younger self, he relented. You know what? You're right, he said, and Anakin let out a breath. Death is too good for the idiot. The former Jedi gasped as all of a sudden, the dark presence around his father doubled in power. What had been a tingle at the edges of his weakened senses, suddenly became a massive headache, and he sunk to his knees as Darth Vader's power spiked. The Sith Lord had sheathed his saber and reached out with one hand, fingers spread above Sidious's head. He was concentrating hard, the power around him growing and growing. Dark clouds began to form in the sky. The rubble began to rise yet again, whirling around in a storm that was accompanied by growling thunder. Anakin couldn't stand it. The darkness was so absolute, so strong, and it wasn't even directed at him. Sidious's yellow eyes widened, staring into Vader's that had taken on a red glint. They were fighting a duel of the mind, Anakin realized. He tried to clumsily feel for his connection to his father to try and stop whatever he was doing, but even though he could sense his dark power now, he still couldn't reach him. He was farther away than ever. All of a sudden, it was over. Sidious slumped over, trembling as if under the effects of Sith lighting. He was muttering incomprehensible things. In one moment he caught Anakin's eye, and the young man could only stare. Sidious's eyes were blue. What have you done? Anakin asked. His father's presence was still very much oppressive, but it began to withdraw slowly. Don't you recognize it? Vader asked mockingly. It's the same technique you have used as well. You? Yes, I have taken his powers of the Force. He is no longer Darth Sidious. He's merely some weak chancellor submitting to the conqueror of the galaxy. But Anakin's eyes shot over to his father, regarding him with worry. He remembered how terrible he'd felt after using that technique, not to mention that huge sacrifice of severing one's own connection to the Force. But Vader's presence was still strong, the darkness still singing happily around him. That's when he remembered there were two ways to cut someone off from the Force. Instead of synchronizing his aura with the other Sith Lords, Vader had overpowered him violently, and forced his mind to erect a barrier, before it was being ripped to shreds by the pressure. One last time Vader raised his hand, and with a single wave of it, he sent the old man to sleep. With no protection whatsoever and weakened as he was, the mighty Sith Lord was susceptible to even the simplest mind trick. Anakin swallowed the lump in his throat. He really didn't know if he should count that as a win or not. Does that mean it's over now? He asked, barely daring to hope. No, it has only just begun. With that, Vader raised his head to the sky. The storm was still going strong, but there was something off about the lighting that could be seen occasionally. Now that he paid attention to it, Anakin could clearly make out the sounds of explosions in the distance. What is that? He asked breathlessly. Vader's expression darkened. That is the Separatist fleet, he growled. That is Lady Furno. It seems she has survived and she's come to kill me. XXX. We can't just bomb the station, Fyrl argued. He was pacing on the bridge of his Star Destroyer, which was annoying as it meant his holographic image randomly vanished. What if our master is on it? We should wait for him to contact us. Did you even read my report? Maul returned angrily. It's been days since any of us last heard from him. He's either dead, a captiver still biding his time, there's no reason for him to be on the station. We have to bomb it or we don't stand a chance getting close enough to the surface to dispatch any ships. Fyrl wanted to argue further, but he was cut off by a sudden spike of something. Something inherently dark and furious. The two Sith shuddered. The disturbance of the Force was so great that neither could breathe for a moment. It was as if their master was holding their throats tightly, ruthlessly closing off their airway. Maul and Fyrl had both taken care to shield their presence when they approached Coruscant as to not tip off Sidious. They were still connected to their master, but they couldn't reach his mind. It was as if he was just too far away even though they were in the same solar system. His mind was shrouded and unreachable. He was blocking them out. But anybody, connected or not, would have been able to feel Darth Vader's anger in that moment. It was truly frightening. Dang it, Fyrl cursed and looked to the side distractedly. Maul raised an eyebrow at him, but his brother seemed to pay attention to something he couldn't see. You let the dang kid in here. He shouted shortly before throwing Maul a glare. When Maul had joined the Executor with the rest of the Separatist fleet, he had ordered Bells to stay with Fyrl. For one, he just wanted to get rid of a kid that might or might not be a reincarnated evil AI. However, they had also decided that the Executor with Maul as commander would lead the assault on the core. Fire would concentrate on this ship, which was just as well as it was still very much damaged, and would have to undergo extensive repairs or maybe be rebuilt anyway. However, that also meant it wasn't exactly a place for a child to stay. Of course, Fyrl had ordered the child to go to a heavily warded section of the ship, and fully intended to forget about her, but apparently she had found a way to sneak onto his bridge. Fyrl stood still, obviously listening to someone Maul couldn't see over the holo transmission. Then he turned back to his brother with an unreadable expression. Brother, you better turn on the local news, he said. Maul scowled but did as he said, switching on a second holo projector which broadcast news of the planet. As expected, the channel was in a state of panic from their impending invasion. But wait, there was a report on a separate attack on the Senate. Some shaky pictures were shown too. Did we send any bombers down there? He asked with a scowl. None that I know of. But this happened recently. Like, just a minute ago. Around the same time that they felt the spike of power from their master. Well, at least now we know where he is, Maul muttered. I'm gonna bomb the station now, Fyrl said with a sigh. They would hit the headquarters of the clones. Make sure they leave the spaceport alone, Maul reminded him. It would be his mission to distract the outer planetary defense, and hopefully take out a couple of their battle stations. As soon as they started dispatching the invasion ships, it would be suicidal to try and reach the surface. He would have to wait until Coruscant officially capitulated before he could get to his master. He just hoped that Sidious would be dealt with by then. Is there something else? Fyrl asked when his brother stayed silent but didn't end the transmission. No, it's just I have a bad feeling about this, Maul muttered. That didn't have to mean anything. He had that gut-wrenching feeling ever since he woke up on the damaged ship. It had been haunting him for days, but he couldn't make head or tails of it. It probably had something to do with that blasted child. I know, Fyrl then answered unexpectedly. I feel it as well. Maul looked back at his brother, surprised. You feel it too? The Zabrak nodded. It's almost as bad as that day. You have to be careful, brother. Promise me. Maul felt a painful stab at the reminder of their missing brother. This was supposed to be a three-man conference. Maul knew that his mission was a dangerous one. He was maneuvering a heavily damaged ship against an overwhelming fleet after all. Still, he was confident in his abilities. He would make it through this. He had to. I promise, he told his brother, and Oli then ended the call. Maul threw a glance at the radar. Another squad of fighters had been sent after his ship. The Sith moved to give the command to his droid crew to prepare for the assault. If he could adjust their position correctly so that the cannons faced the small moon holding the closest defense station of the planet, he could probably buy some time. He was in the middle of typing when suddenly the automatic doors behind him slid open. Maul turned, expecting to see one of the droids with a report of some sort. Instead, he found himself face to face with a looming black figure, wearing something that vaguely resembled Skywalker's training apparel. He looked like a droid, at least on the surface, with that smooth helmet and armored body. The steel cords and gears were clearly visible in his legs and arms, but Maul immediately felt something wrong around him. Whatever the race, this being was alive and it was emitting a definite force presence. It was not as astonishingly powerful as Vader's or Sidious's, but it was so full of hatred Maul was momentarily stumped by it. The Sith apprentice had practiced the dark arts extensively, had learned to utilize anger, fear and frustration, but he still had a firm grip on those emotions. This man, if it was a man at all, gave off no such feeling. His emotions, only marginally hidden so as to not alert everyone around him to his presence, were pure and primal. There was nothing there except a desire to destroy and kill. Maul stood slowly, never leaving the eyes off the figure, as the Force was screaming at him of danger. "Who are you?" he wanted to know. "How did you get in here?" There was no answer except a red lightsaber coming to life in the man's hand. He lunged forward suddenly, aiming for Maul's heart. A moment later the Sith felt a searing pain and he gasped, yellow eyes widening. He guessed now he knew where the bad feeling came from. Why would Bellatrix try to kill you? Anakin shouted over the noise of the storm and the dozens of ships filling the sky to rise against a new threat. Last time he checked, the AI had done everything in her power to keep his father safe. Does it really matter? Vader answered with a scoff. Maybe she woke up when I shut her down. That would be ironic. Anyway, I can sense great danger from up there. They certainly don't wish us well. Suddenly from all around the crashed dome they stood in, transport ships rose. They were filled to the brink with clone warriors, all of them pointing their blasters at them. Anakin felt his heart sink at the sight of them, even as his father readied his lightsaber. If these people attacked now, they were as good as dead. One of the ships sank lower, and Anakin's eyes widened as he saw the figure leading the clones. Organa. Indeed, the senator looked quite bruised and battered, but he was alive. Senator Organa, Vader scoffed. His hand flexed in a grip that Anakin knew was the prerequisite to throwing his lightsaber at an enemy, and he tensed, prepared to step in. Lord Vader, the senator returned, head held high. Have you come to die? No. I have come to capitulate. Vader's eyebrows rose. Oh, you have defeated Chancellor Palpatine, and there is serious doubt now about the legality of his position. He is also under suspect of having committed crimes against the Republic. As one of the last remaining members of the Senate that haven't fled yet, I acknowledge your victory. With your permission, we will take the Chancellor into custody until he can be judged. If you would call back your fleet, we will offer no resistance. No resistance? Vader laughed. Don't take me for a fool, Senator. You of all people would never acknowledge my authority. You just want to buy time to build up your forces elsewhere. Father, please. They have given up, Anakin urged him. Still he knew it was no use. Vader did not control the fleet heading for them, and he could not let the senator know that. Even if he wanted to accept the capitulation, he couldn't. Anakin saw his father ready his weapon. Determined, he stepped in front of him. With your permission, he said between clenched teeth, I will go up to the flagship and relay the change of plans. What he really was offering was of course to remove whatever danger was on that ship, and to keep it from bombing the planet. He didn't think that Furno was to blame for this. She had gone to great lengths to be with his father. Even if he had tried to destroy her, she wouldn't hate him for it. She was unable to. There's nothing up there for you to do, Vader growled. If it really was Furno, he didn't have a chance fighting her on her home turf. I don't want any more blood to be shed today, the former Jedi returned, throwing a meaningful glance at the body surrounding them. He would not go up there to fight but to investigate. For a couple of 10 seconds, father and son stared at each other. At last though, Vader deactivated his lightsaber. Fine, you may go. Don't take too long, my patience isn't endless. Anakin nodded gladly and sprinted over to one of the transport ships. Faced with the expressionless clones, he winced for a moment. What might they think of him? He was the one who had given them an order to go against everything they believed in. There had been a time when he had been one of the most respected generals in their army, but now, the clones didn't say anything to him. They merely helped him to find a ship that would bring him up, and a few minutes later he was off. XXX. The lightsaber had barely missed Darth Maul, grazing his side. The Sith made a backflip to land on top of the console, bringing some distance between him and his opponent. How did you manage to get here? He growled, but the figure didn't answer. Fine, let's do it your way. Maul activated his lightsaber, the two blades springing to life at each end of the handle, as he got into his fighting stance. Then the creature spoke, and his dark raw voice seemed to come out of a deep dark hole. Darth Maul, you are Vader's apprentice. Tell me where he is. Maul scoffed at the clueless idiot. Like I'm gonna tell you anything. With that he charged ahead, his saber whirling around at an incredible speed. The cyborg answered with an attack on his own, his style surprisingly defensive. Maul utilized the force, pushing the figure away to gain an advantage, but he barely moved. The dark side began to rise around them. With a frown, the Sith realized his opponent was trying to wrench control over it from him. The attempt was crude but powerful. He was an out-of-control force sensitive, but he had to have had at least a minimum of training in the dark side. One of Sidious's apprentices, perhaps. It seemed the most likely. But Maul was more experienced in handling the dark side. He had been trained by the best after all. It took him some effort, but he managed to get the upper hand. He caught the ripped-out console part the cyborg threw at him and launched it right back. Using the force to accelerate his speed, he sprinted forward and used the momentum to deliver a powerful strike with his lightsaber. He could feel the dark side move like waves between them, different from the violent clash when he faced against an overwhelming foe like Vader or light side user, but not the same powerful energy that usually wiped out his non-sensitive or mechanic victims. The dark side got stronger the more negative feelings were fed into it, and this man's hatred overshadowed everything Maul had ever seen. Still, he did not know how to use it most efficiently, and Maul fully intended to use that to his advantage. Maul force pushed his enemy away and had to duck a moment later, when the cyborg threw his lightsaber at him with a roar of fury. He switched his grip, his saber half behind him, and held out the other hand. Powerful blue lighting sprung from his fingertips. The red lightsaber was already on its way of spinning back to his owner, who was just barely able to catch it before Maul's attack connected. He was too late to properly block the lighting though, and the power behind the attack forced him to his knees. Surprisingly though, he barely gave a grunt of pain. With a scowl, the Sith doubled his efforts with no visible result. As soon as the lighting stopped, the cyborg was on his feet again. Smoke was rising from his artificial limbs, and he moved visibly slower. His power spiked again, his pain giving him more energy. His body must be quite damaged, but it seemed his hatred and the Force still kept him going. "Bloody lunatic," Maul muttered and whirled his lightsaber around again to block the incoming attack. Suddenly the bridge was being flooded by fluctuating orange light, and a wailing noise could be heard as an alarm went off. Maul jumped high into the air, giving him some leverage to find out what was wrong. He cursed as he realized the course of the ship had not been properly corrected. The Executor was still heading right towards Coruscant and getting dangerously close to the atmosphere. "You've got to be kidding me," he growled, sending another force push at the cyborg, and hurried to the console to correct the course away from a potentially devastating crash. That's what he got for banning the AI and relying on droids. Come to think of it, he hadn't received any messages from the navigation crew in some time. What the heck were those idiots doing? The Force screamed a warning at him, and Maul whirled around, blocking a red lightsaber, as the cyborg attacked him anew. "Idiot, I have to turn the ship away or we're both gonna die," he shouted, frustrated that he couldn't pilot the ship and fight another Sith at the same time. This was a superstar destroyer after all. It required a crew of at least 20 for the bridge alone at all times, and Maul was not a trained pilot. "He's there, isn't he?" the cyborg said, breathing loudly. "Vader is on that planet. I can feel it." Maul cursed and tried to push him away again, but this time his opponent was prepared and fought back. He couldn't seriously want the ship to crash on the capital planet, could he? It would be certain death for them both. Other lights and alarms went crazy, several communications coming in, but Maul was too busy getting rid of the creature. Concentrating with all his might, he moved to hold him in a force grip, and for a moment the cyborg just floated in the air, as the pressure closed in on him. Maul concentrated his efforts on his mechanical limbs, crushing and bending the durasteel like it was a bunch of straws, but before he could fully incapacitate him, the creature let out a powerful wave of the Force, putting Maul off balance. "Warning, outer plating in Sector A is superheating," a mechanical voice called out from one of the alarms. "Impact in 5 minutes. Crap. XXX. The Superstar Destroyer was coming closer at an alarming speed. Anakin threw a worried look at the radar of his borrowed starfighter. It was high time the battleship pulled up as its distance to the surface was rapidly diminishing. He could even see the tip of the metal monster turning orange from the heat of entering the atmosphere. Anakin didn't think Furno would subject her precious ship to such danger, but just in case it would be unwise to dock in the hangar bay. Instead, he maneuvered his ship as close to the bridge as he dared. None of the lasers or ion cannons made any attempt to shoot him down. He had to push it to his very speed limit to keep the two ships at the same level. He managed to land on the surface, the whole ship shaking with the strain, but being pressed close to it at the same time. Anakin drew his lightsaber and rammed it into the ground and the metal plating on the ship underneath. He had managed to land close to the windows of the bridge, so he only had one layer to get through. He managed to produce a decent hole, kicked it in and jumped down into the room below, before the automatic energy barriers protecting the bridge could shoot up. Half a second later he had to duck as a red lightsaber came fizzing at his head. For a moment the former Jedi could only gape at the two figures battling each other on the bridge of the Superstar Destroyer. Darth Maul was swinging his giant two-bladed lightsaber, blue lighting quivering around the red plasma beams and casually slicing through the floor and console parts, trying to get through the defense of a man wearing what looked suspiciously like his father's discarded Sith armor. It was certainly not a sight he had expected when he came here. For now Maul seemed to have the upper hand. Anakin had no intention to waste any time, and so he only spared the two idiots a glare before getting to work at the console. He could figure out what their problem was later. Now he had to prevent the ship from crashing on Coruscant and killing millions of innocent civilians. "Right on time, boy," the Sith apprentice muttered when he saw what he was doing. The distraction cost him though as the armored guy Force pushed him away, and the next moment, a red lightsaber crashed into the console next to Anakin, barely missing his hands. "What the heck?" Anakin shouted as a whole number of alarms went off. He turned to the man angrily, not the least bit bothered by the dark mask that he had worn himself for some time. "I'm trying to save all our lives and millions of others here, give me a break." Anakin, the man said in a raw voice which the former Jedi knew was further darkened by the built-in voice distortion device. He didn't get the chance to say any more because Maul was violently hauling him away from Anakin. I'll take care of this lunatic, you make sure the ship stays intact. No? Vader has to die, I have to kill him. Said lunatic was shouting. Anakin just threw him a look of disgust. He knew his father had many enemies, but to kill him, while sacrificing not only one's own life, but also the lives of so many others. That wasn't the Jedi way, heck it wasn't even the Sith way, it was just madness. Anakin began to work again, typing in commands, his eyes flying desperately over the displays. But it was futile. We're coming in too fast. He called out, genuine fear welling up in him. If he couldn't stop the ship, they would all die. His father would die. He would die. I can't pull it up. The lightsaber had destroyed a few essential controls, and there was just no time. Impact in 1 minute. Suddenly Anakin was being hurled away from the console. Something smooth was being pressed into his hand, and it took him a moment to recognize Maul's lightsaber. The Sith himself jumped on top of the console, facing the giant window and the rapidly approaching planet. Anakin was able to swing the weapon just in time to block the enemy's red blade, aiming for the Zabrak's unprotected back. Now tied up in a duel of his own, Anakin had only a glance to spare for the Sith apprentice who just stood there unmoving, arms held out wide, and fingers curled like claws with an expression of intense concentration on his face. Come on master, help me. He muttered, and Anakin realized with a mix of horror and awe that Maul was trying to stop the Superstar Destroyer using the Force. And he could feel it not as clearly as he had felt his father's power on Coruscant, but he could definitely feel the Force respond to the Zabrak. For a moment the proof that his Force sense was returning made his heart skip a beat, but he berated himself for allowing himself to get distracted by something like that when they were still heading headfirst to their doom. XXX. Darth Vader scowled, watching the sky darken. The Force screamed to him of danger, but as he reached out with his senses, he couldn't get any hint of where the danger was coming from. Just everywhere. The clones had taken the unconscious form of Darth Sidious with them. Vader had watched one of them giving him a good kick against the head, and a light mind probe revealed that they were aware of who really had given them the order to kill the Jedi. Anakin must have conferred with Organa, who then told the clones. They were bred to obey, true, but they were loyal to the government. Vader had taken his time to research this. They weren't loyal to the Republic or democracy or even Palpatine, but just the government. The Sith Lord had intended to leave the Empire in his hands, should he be able to defeat him and fulfill the role of two after all, so they couldn't be bound to a single person. Not to mention that it would have been suspicious. Thus it was no wonder that the clones would abandon the Chancellor as soon as he was charged with treason, and the government had all but switched over to him. They had been trained to keep order, and if Vader was the only way out of chaos, they would follow him. But he could worry about the clones later. The danger up there was far more important. Darth Vader closed his eyes and connected with the Force effortlessly. Slowly a picture began to form in his mind, a picture of his own flagship, heading straight at. His eyes flew open. This was far more serious than he had thought. It was too late to get himself a transport, he wouldn't make it in time. At least Anakin was out of reach. As soon as his thoughts wandered to the boy, Vader tried to connect to the mind of his son instinctively. There was something there where just a black hole used to be. He noticed somewhat detached that it appeared his younger self was gaining back his Force sensitivity, but it was still far too weak to do anything. Even for him the sensation was too faint to connect to. Maybe he should feel happy or relieved that Anakin would make it if he was smart enough to keep out of the way of the self-destroying Superstar Destroyer. But his heart was still so filled with anger it was hard to feel anything else, even worry about his own fate. He was just so furious, about Furno for ruining his plans, about Anakin for catching him off guard with his stunt, about Sidious for just existing, and now about the ship aiming to crush him. It was like a whole lot of anger and fear and pain and betrayal had left him to be replaced by an aimless fury, like an echo coming back to overwhelm him. Darth Vader stumbled for a moment at that line of thought. It was a classic definition of the dark side, but it was not how it was supposed to be. Not for him, at least. He should be exempt from these alterations. The Dark Lord shook his head. It did not matter now. The Force was probably doing him a favor, filtering his emotions like this. It helped him to keep a cool head, it helped him to think, and that meant there must be something he could do still. There was something else next to his son. Now that he searched for it, he found quite a number of strong Force presences up there. One he immediately recognized as Feral, but the other two. Slowly a grin spread on his face. So he did survive them. Darth Vader fully dropped the shields around his mind and closed his eyes to concentrate. He could feel his desperate apprentice trying to connect with him, and he graciously allowed him to do so. Sharing one mind, throwing together their combined power, they connected through the Force, and the image of the ship heading for the planet became clear in his mind. Darth Vader reached out for the Force with his entire being, the darkness filling him completely. He held onto his vision, poured all his power and will into it, and then he pushed. XXX. Anakin returned his attention to his opponent. They exchanged a couple of quick strikes, Anakin being pushed back from the power of the attacks. Soon their lightsabers were locked, and it was only now Anakin noticed the steel ropes and rods his opponent's arms were made of. He wasn't just wearing the armor, this was the fully life support suit. You shouldn't help the Sith scum, the man growled at him hatefully. You're supposed to be a Jedi, but you betrayed the order. That was it. Anakin pushed the intruder away with a battle cry. He'd had enough. There he was, trying to save the planet, and he was just one step away from bringing his father back to the light, and thus saving the entire galaxy from an age of darkness. He had escaped a crazy AI, defeated fate by saving his wife, survived a duel against the most evil Sith to ever walk the galaxy, all while being absolutely force blind, and now this random terrorist came along and wanted to ruin it all. He wanted to kill his father who he'd fought so hard to keep in his heart, wanted to throw the galaxy into further war, by killing the one person with the power to bring back order, all while killing Anakin and a couple of millions of others, and he had the nerve to accuse him of betraying the Jedi dang him. What right did he have? This was so not gonna happen. With a cry of anger the power of Anakin's attacks doubled, and as his fury rose, he could feel the tiniest quiver of a sixth sense at the very edge of his conscience. Thus encouraged he whirled around the foreign weapon at his opponent who could only defend himself. Suddenly there was a jerk going through the entire ship. Anakin was thrown off his feet and met the wall with a heavy thud, probably earning a concussion as the room switched directions. The artificial gravity made it hard to notice, but they had been heading almost vertically for the planet, and as the Executor's nose was suddenly pulled sideways, it threw them all off balance. He saw Maul lying on the ground and moved to help him up, but the Zabrak pushed him away with a growl. "Finish off that idiot, you're no use to me right now," he said before moving to face the window again. They were still heading downwards, but with a bit effort, maybe he could manage to steer the course to narrowly miss the planet itself. It truly was an amazing act. Of course his words stung a little. Maul had always been rather grumpy, and even living together with him on the same ship for several weeks, had not managed to make him come out of his shell. Still he was important to his father, and now that Anakin had accepted and even wished to be part of that family, the apprentice's disregard hurt him. But he was right, at least in the moment there was nothing Anakin could do to help him. His wounded pride just added to his anger and frustration, and he gripped the lightsaber tightly. The armored guy had sunken down at the opposite wall, but the harsh breathing sound told him he was still alive. Anakin stepped forward, and for the second time this day he felt such an overwhelming need to strike down his foe, for he well and truly believed he deserved it. He would probably even do this thing a favor. The former Jedi played with the thought of removing the helmet, but he wasn't really that interested whose face was under it. Probably just one of Sidious's former apprentices, being driven by the dark side to do all kinds of unspeakable things. Even if he did remove the mask, if it was indeed the full version of the life support suit, the creature within would die within minutes, surrounded by Imperial. Still he was hesitating to strike him down because there was something nagging at the back of his head, urging him to take a closer look. It felt too much like a force warning to ignore, not when he hadn't had such a feeling in what must be ages. And so Anakin knelt down next to the machine man who was either unconscious or too weak to move, and he leaned close, staring hard at the large black tinted eye forms, and he desperately tried to connect to the Force, tried to feel the presence of the man before him. It was hard, like catching a wildly flaring ribbon during a sandstorm, and he had to concentrate so hard. There was something familiar about this figure other than the black armor, but it was wrong. The darkness was wrong, like it was not supposed to be there, it was supposed to be light. And then it hit him like a ton of bricks, making him flinch and back away with a gasp. Obi-Wan. Flashback several weeks ago, Obi-Wan Kenobi hung in his ropes, watching the Dark Lord circling him tiredly. Now, everyone thinks you're dead, that the clones killed you, the figure that was so mockingly resembling his late Padawan explained calmly. Obi-Wan had a bad feeling about this. I have you all for myself. I can do to you whatever I want with no consequences and no time limit. And guess what? Again, I decided against killing you. The Jedi couldn't help but let out a small breath of relief. It wasn't that he thought Vader incapable of killing his enemies or even innocents, but he was well aware that Anakin's influence was the only thing restraining the Sith. His next words, however, quickly squashed his hopes. I've waited too long for that. I want to taste my victory, my revenge. I know, I'm a bit late. You could even argue that you might not deserve what I'm about to do to you, as I'm punishing you for something that, technically, you haven't done. But you know what? The Sith stopped circling him, getting into his face, ignoring the confused look the Jedi who had no idea what he was talking about gave him. I don't care about technicalities anymore, Vader hissed, the dark side rising powerfully around him, and making the Jedi shiver. 20 years of pain and suffering do not care for technicalities. Now, he said, stepped back and switched on his red lightsaber, regarding the blade almost lovingly. Shall we begin? Wait a second, he tried, regarding the lightsaber nervously. What are you planning to do with that? Oh, I think you know that perfectly well, Vader smiled at him, and Obi-Wan was eerily reminded of the way Anakin would smile at a caught informant, assuring him that he had nothing to fear right before he invaded his mind, ruthlessly searching for the information he needed. Only that Vader wasn't after information. The Sith grabbed Obi-Wan's left hand, still being held by the energy ropes. The Jedi started to struggle, but his movements were too limited. He tried to call out for the Force, to push the Sith away, but the lightsaber was inching closer, and there was this maniacal glint in Vader's yellow eyes. At last, the Jedi braced himself for the pain, and he managed to hold perfectly still, to not make a noise as the plasma blade cut straight through flesh and bones. It was over soon. Painful, but bearable. Then Vader stepped back and he held up the pinky he had cut off like a morbid trophy, grinning like a child who ripped off the wings of a butterfly. That's when Obi-Wan really felt sick, and that's also when the pain hit him. He managed barely not to scream, but his breathing was going fast and labored. He wheezed from the effort of holding back the natural reaction of his body. It's really not easy, you know, Vader said in a conversational tone. To cut off a single finger with a lightsaber and leave the others undamaged. Yeah, right, the Jedi returned with a scowl. If you want to torture me, you have to do better than that. The lightsaber was a tool that the Jedi used to defend themselves. Even if it was used to kill, it did so fast and painlessly. A weapon that immediately cauterized the wounds was not much good for torturing. I'll take that advice to heart, Vader returned. Let me try again. You've got to be kidding me, Obi-Wan thought when Vader grabbed his hand again. This time he bit his tongue hard enough to draw blood. Thoughts raced in his mind on how to get out of this hopeless situation. He was so used to channeling the Force with his hands, but he knew theoretically he should be able to push Vader away without them as well. And he tried. The moment his second finger came off he tried again, but Vader just grinned at his efforts. The ropes shook a bit and the light flickered, but beyond that, nothing happened. The pain and upcoming panic was distracting him, preventing him from fully immersing himself in the Force. Too gone, Vader muttered, letting the finger drop to the ground unceremoniously where it rolled to bump against Obi-Wan's right shoe, leaving a thin red tail. Then his hand rushed forward, delivering a precise strike to the area connecting Obi-Wan's right hand prosthetic to his arm that he'd gotten after the Battle of Geonosis, causing the damaged contraption to fail and fall away. For a moment Vader stared at it almost disappointed before he sighed and took the Jedi's flesh hand instead. 3 more to go. XXX. Obi-Wan managed to keep his composure through the whole ordeal. He remained silent and unmoving, his mouth full of blood from biting his own tongue, even as a droid came in to collect his fingers with a freaking dustpan. His hands got new bandages, but he refused the food they brought him. Then, he was left alone. He tried to mediate. He tried to connect to the Force, maybe to reach out for Anakin. But there was something blocking him. He could still feel the Force, but it was as if there was a solid wall between him and the universe that he just couldn't break through. 2 days passed. At least he thought it was 2 days as the droids came back with food 2 times. He refused it again, though he did take the water. Slowly the realization began to sink in that he would never hold a lightsaber again. At least not with his own hands. He had the Force, he didn't need his hands to move stuff, he tried to tell himself. He'd lived with a prosthetic for the last 4 years. But he just lost all 5 of his fingers of his remaining organic hand, and the bloody psychopath didn't seem to be finished with him. He wondered what he'd done to deserve this. Vader had been so cryptic, as if he was punishing Obi-Wan for something that he would do in the future. Maybe he'd had a vision. But what would make him hate him so much he would bother to waste so much time instead of just killing him? Obi-Wan didn't know, but he couldn't help the small part of him that hoped it was something that would hurt Vader very much. He berated himself for that thought almost immediately. What Vader had done to him was wrong, but no person was born evil. There had to be something that made him the man he was now, and Obi-Wan, as a Jedi, would never do something of the magnitude to drive a man to such madness. When Vader came back the next time, he had with him a small holo projector. "Greetings, my old friend," he started cheerfully. "Since you're just hanging around here, I thought I would give you something to pass the time." He placed the projector in front of him and turned it on. There was a news report. Obi-Wan listened, first confused then with growing horror as the woman in the vid explained how Anakin Skywalker had betrayed the Republic, how he joined with his father Darth Vader, and together they formed a vicious plan to eradicate the Jedi. How they had invented a virus that temporarily made the clones obey them, and how Anakin had then given them the order to kill all Jedi. It got even worse as the news report switched to a show of pictures and small vids, probably made from the field cams of the clones, showing the deaths of various Jedi. Many of them Obi-Wan had known personally. When his own men, the clones who he'd called friends, had suddenly turned on him, Obi-Wan had suspected the phenomenon might be greater than just Palpatine wanting to get rid of him. But this was worse than anything he could have ever imagined. "You know what's funny?" Vader asked just as the vid showed the Jedi Temple of Flame, dozens of bodies too small for a grown man being carried out of it. "They blame Order 66 on my son. They say he's joined me and betrayed the Jedi, but it's exactly the other way around. The Jedi are the ones that have abandoned him. Now that both the Republic and the Sith are out for his blood, I am the only one he can turn to. My little boy has finally come home." He chuckled, watching the slaughter on the projector, and Obi-Wan felt a sudden urge to strangle that monster. The horrendous implication of his words made his skin crawl. Palpatine might have been the one to come up with Order 66, but the Jedi was certainly not convinced that Vader had nothing to do with it. For all he knew, the Sith could have used his knowledge of Palpatine's plan and brought it to its conclusion on his own grounds. But Anakin would never join Vader. He had left the Order. Sure, he might even resent the Jedi a bit, but he would never work with Vader to make sure Palpatine's order was enacted. "No reason to look at me like that," Vader scolded him. "I really had no hand in this. I know what Sidious was planning, of course. But I warned you, didn't I? Qui-Gon all but told you the Republic was being led by a Sith Lord years ago. I also know that Anakin knew of the clones beforehand. I guess he told you about that too. So really, you can't blame it on me. If anyone is at fault, then it is you." Obi-Wan gaped at him. "But I couldn't. What should I have done? Does it really matter? You did nothing and now they're dead. You failed to negotiate the peace, you failed to protect your order, and you failed in keeping Anakin away from me. Now he is mine and he will do everything in his power to make sure the sacrifice of the Jedi, your sacrifice, is no for naught. He is so eager to help me kill Sidious. Isn't the world funny?" Something in Obi-Wan snapped. The realization of all his friends and comrades dying, the betrayal, his worry about Anakin and the aching in his limbs, it all came down on him, and he let out a shout of denial and anger. And Vader laughed. He just laughed at him, and the dark side swirled around him happily, reveling in the Jedi's agony. XXX. The next day Vader was in a bad mod. There was no slow enjoyment in his treatment of Obi-Wan, and no precisely aimed emotional torture. He just stormed into the cell madly furious and beat the Jedi till he was barely conscious. He barely talked, just cursed Obi-Wan, and when he tried to talk back he choked him with the Force. After an hour or two he calmed down a bit. Many of the wounds the Jedi had gotten during his flight had reopened, leaving him bloody in his bandages and rags. Vader took a step back, regarded his pathetic form, and then he drew his lightsaber again. Obi-Wan flinched at the sight of it. The beating he could endure, he'd had worse before. Vader's fury meant something had gone badly for him, and as far as Obi-Wan was concerned, that was a good thing. But why did he draw his lightsaber all of a sudden? It wasn't like he had any more fingers to loose. Vader quickly answered that question though. With a quick slash, he severed the rope holding Obi-Wan's right arm. The gesture was so unexpected the Jedi just slumped to the side like a rag doll. He'd had been hanging in an eagle spread position for 4 days now. Even if he tried, he couldn't use his limbs properly anymore. His blood circulation was shot to heck. Another few slashes and the Jedi tumbled to the ground entirely. He was weakened and injured, but still he saw his chance, and utilizing what little strength remained, he feinted an attack at Vader, only to change course at the last moment and try to sprint for the exit. He didn't think. He didn't remember that he was on board Vader's ship, that he had a small army of droids and a labyrinth of corridors before him. He just wanted to leave. Of course he didn't get very far. Vader caught him in a force hold and unceremoniously bashed him against the wall. For a second everything went black. Obi-Wan awoke from a burning pain in his left hand. Darth Vader stood over him, one boot on his chest. He used the Force to hold him down, which was more effective than any chains. His lightsaber was cutting through his hand. The boot on his chest was pressing on his lungs. Still the Jedi howled in pain as Vader cut a slice of meat from his hand. Then another and another. He only stopped when he reached the upper arm, and by that time Obi-Wan was thankfully so out of it, he barely felt anything anymore. When the Dark Lord left, the Jedi was left sobbing and clutching his arm stump, now just as short as the scarred one of his right arm. Still his presence lingered and Obi-Wan found it hard to breathe. The darkness around was that suffocating. That day he was transferred to another cell. Droids cleaned him up and patched up his wounds. Once Obi-Wan tried to free himself. He turned the droids into scrap metal with the Force, but he couldn't get through the doors. They were magnetic, heavy things, and he was too weak in mind to get through them. From somewhere above him a hidden trapper drone hit him with a poison dart, and he was out like a light within seconds. His new cell was dark and like the old had been, but less sturdy. He wasn't chained anymore, that was a plus, and there was a toilet fused to the ground, which was definitely better than peeing in a bucket held by a droid. No bed and nothing else that could be of use to him. Occasionally a droid would shove a tray with food through a window at the bottom of the door. There was no light anywhere, so Obi-Wan had to find the tray blindly. He then took it and flushed the food down the toilet. The Jedi knew where this was going. Vader was keeping him alive, removing sources of infection, sending him medical droids and food. He wanted to keep him, torture him some more before he finally killed him. There was no reason for Obi-Wan to prolong this. He would never get out of here. Even if he did, what would he do? The Jedi Order was no more. Anakin was a fugitive, the Separatists had won. He could no longer hold a lightsaber. There was no reason for him to eat his bloody breakfast. Time passed. Obi-Wan recognized the various long-term torture methods applied to him. The food kept coming irregularly. Sometimes he would get 2 meals a day, sometimes he would get none, and always at random hours, until he lost his feeling for time. Every few hours flashlights at the ceiling would flare up, turning the room a blinding light. It would stay on for some time, then go out again. It was impossible to get a decent night of sleep for him this way. One time, when he did eat the food or drink the water simply because he was thirsty, he would feel strange and high-headed afterward, only to start sweating and throwing up later when the drugs wore off. He stopped eating completely after that. It was easier than he would have thought as he felt too weak to lie down on his stomach and crouched down to eat his food from the tray, unable to lift it anymore. Then there were Vader's visits. He never freaked out as much as that one night, but Obi-Wan learned to fear his calm stare even more. He continued to slice through Obi-Wan's left lower and right upper arm. The Jedi tried again to talk to him, but when he wasn't screaming, Vader choked him. He wished the Sith would just die. Darth Vader kicked the unmoving form of the Jedi and let out a snort. "Just look at you, Kenobi," he scoffed. "It's been only 2 weeks and already, you are a broken man. You just lost your arms in your order. What's wrong? Can't get past a crisis like that. How weak are you?" Obi-Wan didn't bother answering. He had taken another beating today. His torso was tightly bandaged, hiding the 2 gaping holes at his shoulders. He hadn't slept in days, and the blood loss coupled with dehydration made him practically a walking corpse. Except of course that he wasn't walking. He couldn't, owing to Vader having started to cut off his toes. "You think this is bad? You have no idea." Vader continued to talk even though Obi-Wan wasn't really listening. He was so tired. He couldn't even find the strength to take advantage of Vader's talkative mood. What did it matter why the monster thought he deserved such agony? He was crazy, there was no point talking to him. "You're a worthless, pathetic weakling," Vader accused him. "You have no idea how hard it was to entrust my son into your care, even though I knew what you'd do to him. But don't worry. I'm working on undoing the damage." That caught his attention. Obi-Wan scowled, looking up at the Sith. He sensed a feeling of dread from the Force, but that was so common to him by now it merely frustrated him. Seeing as he had his prisoner's attention, Vader continued to gloat. "Oh yes, he's coming along wonderfully. It was about time he started his training. He's here on the ship, did you know that? Just a few levels over us. We're training on a daily basis. There are so many things I have yet to teach him, things you would never tell him about." Hot white fury was blooming in Obi-Wan's chest. Was Vader did he really want to suggest? He's making such a fine apprentice. Obi-Wan let out a roar and lunged forward, vaguely aiming to bite the hand holding the lightsaber. Vader snorted and gave him another kick that sent him flying. The Jedi winced as he hit the wall, but he was up a moment later. "What have you done to Anakin?" he asked furiously. "Don't you dare taint him, you freaking Sith scum." The Dark Lord merely grinned, his yellow eyes so terribly similar to Anakin's. "What are you even complaining about? The poor boy came to me first. He was so haunted by the deaths of his comrades and above all, his master, he begged me to be allowed to kill Sidious himself. I'm merely giving him the right weapons for what his heart wishes to do." The guilt was so strong that he was driven by a fierce desire to make up for it, by committing yet another murder for the greater good. After all, it was his words that sent so many of you to your deaths. Only because you made him do it. Obi-Wan roared in anguish. Anakin would not willingly give Order 66, he tried to convince himself, but there was a tiny part of him asking. Wouldn't he? I never told him to do anything. That was him alone. He just had to prove himself, silly boy, so unsure of his own allegiances. But not anymore. He has no reason to doubt as he has finally taken his rightful place at my side. No, Obi-Wan muttered brokenly. It couldn't be. Anakin had always had a certain desire to be recognized by his father, but he'd had no idea it went so deep. Would Anakin really kill all the Jedi, kill him just to prove himself to Vader? The mere idea broke his heart, but hadn't he seen for himself in the vid what his former Padawan had done? "He's your son," Obi-Wan cried out, trying to reach whatever wretched part lay under the mask of the monster. "Just look at you, you're a sadist, a Sith out of a book. Do you really want a life like that for him? You must not let him touch the dark side. It is already too late for that. You are decades too late. I won't let you do this to him. You don't get it, do you? Anakin is finally where he belongs. That was his fate the whole time. He belongs to me and now finally he has realized this as well. I'm not doing anything to him that he doesn't want. He has recognized what a weak lot the Jedi are. I bet deep within him he is glad that you are gone. No one there to tell him what to do. To have the power to make a change, to make a difference and shape the world as he sees fit. You know that, don't you? You know that desire always slept in him. He wants more out of life, more than you could offer him. Now that he has tasted freedom, he will never return." Obi-Wan felt sick because Vader was right, there was such a desire in Anakin. His pride had been one of his greatest weakness, aside from his attachment to Padme, and the Jedi could see Vader using that to undo the young man. Especially after he turned from the Jedi and he had no one else to turn to. "There is nothing you can do," Vader told him coldly. "These cells are blocking every Force presence. Anakin won't ever find out about you, he won't come to save you. He has given up searching for you. You will remain my prisoner for the rest of your life, or until I get bored of you and grant you the mercy of dying." In hindsight, the trap was obvious. Still as Vader spat out in front of him and left the cell, Obi-Wan fell for his trick completely. He thought about his late Padawan with yellow eyes just like Vader's, hurting innocents and hunting Jedi and shooting Force lightning, and he just couldn't stand the thought of it. He had to save Anakin. And if it was too late, if he really had become just like his father, then it was Obi-Wan's duty as his master to end his misery. The galaxy would not survive two of their sort. The thought gave him strength. Obi-Wan started to eat and drink again. The drugs caused him further pain and mild hallucinations, but it wasn't anything lethal. He had to get his strength back. He had to find a way to get out of his cell and to get to Anakin. He was on the ship, if only he could reach him. The Jedi tried mediating, but whatever it was that was blocking his presence also prevented him from reaching Anakin. Broken and battered, Vader had lost interest in torturing Obi-Wan, but now that he got his spirit back, the Dark Lord returned more often to beat him, and start slicing off his legs bit by bit. His words had meant to bring the Jedi back to life again, and Obi-Wan hated that it had worked. But he hated Vader a lot more. There were times of weakness too. Sometimes he would just curl up in a corner of his cell and cry. When Vader had cut off his first toe and he had realized he was going to lose his legs next, Obi-Wan had cried the whole night. He liked his limbs. He liked his arms and legs, he didn't want to lose them. They were his. Then there were times when he would scream and shout until his throat was raw, and he would curse Vader and wish him all kinds of despicable things. It was not the way of the Jedi. It was not forgiving or compassionate or wise. But he wanted to kill him so much. XXX. Weeks passed. For Obi-Wan, it felt like eternity. Anger and hatred continued to boil within him, but there was also fear. There wasn't much that the Jedi had ever feared, but whenever Vader entered his cell, his anger was overcome by a spike of fear and terror. Because every time Vader entered his cell, it meant he was going to get beaten or be shown another vid from a Jedi who had been hunted down by the clones or Sidious's new apprentice Ventress. Sometimes Vader would gloat about the progress Anakin made in his training, and he described it in such detail, Obi-Wan couldn't pretend it to be a lie. And sometimes he would raise that red lightsaber and cut off slice after slice from his flesh. One of those days as Vader was holding him against the wall with the Force as usual, saber drawn, he looked the Jedi up and down with a scowl and a mocking glare. Not much left to work on. You lost your arms, you lost your legs, what to do next? Oh, I know. He grinned sadistically. How about I ensure you will never procreate? Not that any sane woman would want you. Anger and humiliation welled up in the Jedi, temporarily overriding his fear. He wanted to spit into Vader's grinning face, but instead he let out a wave of the Force that managed to break Vader's grip and let him stumble a few feet away. Obi-Wan immediately fell to the ground, his body now a mere torso helplessly ending up on the ground, face in the dirt. But that didn't matter because Vader was staring at him with surprise and carefully shielded wariness. It had been ages since Obi-Wan had last felt the Force this strongly, let alone used it. He had almost thought something in the food may rob him of his Force abilities, though that was unheard of. The brief moment of power he'd felt was exhilarating. Suddenly Vader started laughing. Oh, this is rich, he let out, all but holding his stomach. This is great. The perfect Obi-Wan Kenobi using the dark side. Who knows, maybe something will become out of you yet. Obi-Wan stared at him incomprehensibly. Dark side. He hadn't really used the dark side. Or had he? You have done very well, Master Kenobi. Why, yes, I think this warrants a reward. I will refrain from causing you any pain today. Relish in your new power. Explore it. Feel it in your blood. You may need it yet. He was left alone after that, and the anger was back, this time mixed with disgust. He tried to mediate, to feel the Force flow around him. But all he could sense was the power within him, a dark and swirling mass that sent a shiver down his spine when he touched it. It was true. The dark side had grown strong in him. Obi-Wan knew he should release his negative feelings into the Force, but instead, his hatred and fury just rose tenfold. He had been a good Jedi. Being a Jedi was all that was left, all that remained from his life outside this cell, and now Vader had taken that from him as well. He had dared to taint him with his presence and tortured him until he couldn't form a single thought that didn't somehow involve how to best cause pain for Darth Vader. It was all his fault. He was evil. And Obi-Wan hated him. XXX. During the following days or weeks or months, he couldn't tell Obi-Wan continued to experiment with the Force. He hated that he had to use that twisted, ugly side of it, but the light would not answer him, regardless of how hard he tried, and he needed to get out of this cell. The next time Vader visited him, he charged a powerful Force push at him. He did not think clearly, did not contemplate a strategy what would happen if he did manage to get out. He did not account what would be the best time to reveal his new power. As soon as he saw Vader's face, the anger just took him over and he attacked without thinking, letting out a primal roar as he did so. Vader was forced to step back, but he somehow caught the attack with his bare hands, letting it dissipate and leaving Obi-Wan frustrated and exhausted. Not bad for a first try, the Dark Lord acknowledged. You have been practicing. Yes, I think that warrants another reward. With those words the door opened completely. 2 droids entered who carried Obi-Wan to a medical bay. He continued to wriggle and struggle, and once he managed to get free by Force pushing his captors, but it just ended with him face first on the floor. Vader merely sighed and lifted him with the Force. He was strapped on a table, and the droids returned with a strange contraption. You have to thank Anakin for this, Vader continued to talk idly. I got the idea from him. Let's call it galactic justice. Ever felt like the Force is laughing at you? Well, I do now. The thing turned out to be a prosthetic arm. Obi-Wan went through 30 minutes of the worst pain ever, and by now that meant something, as the droids worked and hammered the durasteel into his flesh and bones. Somewhere through it all he fell unconscious. When he woke up in his cell he had a new functional left arm with a hand that could grab things and even direct the force much more precisely than he had been able to before. It was a far cry from the mechanic arm Anakin had built for him after the Battle of Geonosis, but it worked. For a moment, Obi-Wan wondered why Vader would give him something as powerful as this. What had been the point in cutting off his arm if he was going to give him a new one? But such thoughts didn't survive for long, because soon the Jedi turned to making plans on how to use the new advantage to kill Vader. He didn't even wonder about fleeing or reaching his former Padawan anymore. His only goal was to kill Vader. That was what kept him alive. Obi-Wan attacked him again when he came next, but he was unfamiliar with his new arm and weakened from the operation. Vader was prepared for the assault and waved it away like it was nothing. For his less than adequate performance, Obi-Wan got beaten again. This time he brought interrogation droids that injected substances into his bloodstream that directly stimulated his pain receptors. It was agony. It went on like this. Vader would punish him for being weak, but on the rare occasions when he managed to catch the Sith off guard, the one time he had called his lightsaber to his hand and attacked him with it, the time he had ripped a toilet off its place and hurled it at Vader, and the time he controlled a droid to fire his blaster at him. Those were the times Vader actually rewarded him. He gave him a second arm, then a leg until finally he had all his four limbs again. He was still shaky on his feet, still half mad from the sleep deprivation and the isolation, but he could walk again and use the Force. Vader didn't bother to have him chained up again, and Obi-Wan didn't bother to flee. There was almost something like an unspoken understanding between them. Obi-Wan's goal was to kill Vader. There would be no point in him trying to flee as Vader came to him regularly. If he wasn't able to defeat him like this, there was no point in getting out. The Jedi didn't know what the Sith gained from helping him recover, but he didn't care. If he thought he would ever be his apprentice and follow his orders, he was dang wrong. Obi-Wan would kill him first. XXX. Once he was complete again, Obi-Wan prepared for the final battle. He was sure the next time Vader stepped through that door, it would be a fight to the death. After all, he was fully recovered now. There would be no more rewards and he had grown much stronger. He did get to fight the Dark Lord, and he fought fiercely, but through it all, Obi-Wan could clearly feel that the Sith was not giving his all. He was merely toying with him, testing his strength. That just angered him more. At last he was knocked unconscious again and woke up on the operation table. "You are doing extremely well," Vader praised him, for an old man, that is. "I think it is time for you to get your finishing touch." The droid stepped up next to him, in its hand a black mask and helmet. "What are you doing?" Obi-Wan asked, the old fear rising in him again. The Force screamed at him, but he couldn't make out the message. This mask was originally constructed to allow its user to breathe without having to strain his own lungs. However, it has many other nifty advantages. You can breathe underwater with it, for example. Obi-Wan almost snorted. As if he could ever go underwater with arms and legs made out of steel. You can breathe in a poisonous atmosphere and see at night and shrug off a blaster shot to the head. Personally, I don't think it's worth the poor view and constant agonizing pain in your chest, but Anakin was rather delighted by it. "What have you done?" Obi-Wan roared again, the name of his former student, only triggering new rage in him these days. He tried to struggle against the droid shaving his head, but Vader was using his overwhelming presence to keep the Jedi motionless. The Sith didn't answer. The fake smile fell from his lips as he looked at Obi-Wan coldly. Then he motioned the droids. "Finish him up," he ordered, and Obi-Wan saw the medical droids move into him, handling all kinds of sharp blades and drills. The Jedi had gone through 4 agonizing operations, had had his limbs cut off slice by slice with a lightsaber, and been beaten to a pulp more times than he could count, but nothing came anywhere close to the pain he now felt. The droids ripped out his throat to make room for the tubes connecting the breathing apparatus to his lungs. Durasteel rods were being hammered into his bones, his upper cervical spine, his jaw and skull. There was no narcotic for him. In fact, the droids were injecting him drugs to keep him conscious through the whole experience. When the mask was fitted onto his face and the helmet came down on top of it, it was almost a relief. "Congratulations," he could hear Vader's mocking voice, almost overshadowed by the absurdly loud noise of his own breathing. "You are a Sith now. Though you haven't really done anything to warrant a proper Sith name yet, how about I just call you Darth?" Like all of his mockeries, it felt like an inside joke he didn't get, and it only worked to further Obi-Wan's anger. But he swore that he would rid the galaxy of that monster, and if it was the last thing he would do, he would kill Vader using any means necessary. That, he swore. XXX. Obi-Wan woke up thoroughly rested for the first time in weeks. He also woke up floating just short under the ceiling due to a strange lack of gravity. Sleep deprivation had been a major part of his routine. His new mask tinted the whole world in red regardless of it being light or dark around him, but apparently Vader had electrical shocks run through his prosthetics at irregular intervals, keeping him weakened and tired all the time. There was only one thing that Obi-Wan could come up with why he would be granted this rest. Vader hadn't visited him again after giving him the finishing touch, which was some time back. He must deem him powerful enough then to have that final duel at last. He had no idea why he would want that duel to take place in Zero-G, but whatever. Thus Obi-Wan waited. He waited a long time. By now he was used to not moving around much, but after some time he still got hungry. Why would Vader let him have sleep but no food? The droid should be here with his meal by now. But nobody ever came. Eventually the frustration got the better of him. Obi-Wan exploded and in a fit of rage attacked the door with the Force. All his negative feelings were fueling blow after blow. Eventually he managed to break down the door, but he felt no satisfaction over the small victory. His freedom did not mean anything to him anymore, he just wanted to kill Vader. Still he went through the cell block cautiously, suspicious over the lack of droids. He found a couple of them but they were turned off, slumped against doors and walls or just randomly lying around. The Jedi found some nutrient and oxygen capsules that he could exchange with the empty ones installed in his throat. He could no longer eat normally with the apparatus. As he continued to ransack the place he also found some black armor plating. Vader must have planned it to be another upgrade for him if he did well. It would only cover his flesh torso and the gaping hole of his neck and throat, but that was better than nothing. In one of the control rooms overseeing the medical bay and his cell he even found a lightsaber. Vader was grown careless if he just forgot it here. Then again, Anakin must have inherited his uncanny ability to loose his sabers from somewhere. It was of course a red lightsaber, and the mere sight of the blade let the fear spike in him. But his wish to slay the monster was stronger than his fear, and so he took the weapon with him. Once outfitted like this, Obi-Wan moved to leave the station. He hesitated shortly. If he wanted to surprise Vader, he must not know that he escaped. Thus he braced himself and shielded his presence as good as he could. But as he stepped out into the next corridor and out of the area that was cut off from the rest of the galaxy force light, he couldn't feel Vader anywhere. Rage boiled up in him. It was possible that he was shielding himself as well, but why would he? This was his ship. If Vader wasn't on board, Obi-Wan cursed. He had to find the monster, he had to kill him. This was his ship, he would return in time. He just had to take care that when it happened, he didn't get a chance to flee. Obi-Wan looked back at the station filled with all kinds of droids. If he removed their batteries he was sure he could build an improvised explosive or two. Darth Vader stood on a platform on the roof of one of the highest skyscrapers in the area. The Separatist fleet had dispatched numerous transport ships, after the outer planetary defense had yielded at the command of Senator Organa. It wasn't a full-scale invasion as the Republic had capitulated, just enough to show presence and let the citizens know who was in charge now. Of course none of them knew how close the whole thing had been, or that they had nearly all been crushed by an out-of-control superstar destroyer. Vader intended to keep it that way. Darth Sidious had been locked up in the tiniest, dirtiest dungeon cell. Vader could find that still provided appropriate security, and the fleet had calmed him that everything was under control up there, but there were still many questions to be answered. One of the droids belonging to his lifeguard, purely there for show, stepped forward to set down the holo-projector, and a moment later an image sprang to life from it. Darth Vader fully expected his apprentice to make his report, so he scowled a bit when he saw the younger brother, Fyril, instead. "Report," he barked harshly, getting fed up with all the chaos. Fyril had appeared kneeling down, and only now dared to lift his head. "My master," he began, "the Karassa sector is under our control. News of the Republic's capitulation have been sent to the other core worlds. We expect their answer within the next 24 hours. Damage to the fleet at large is minimal, but your flagship will have to be replaced completely. It has been evacuated and isolated as the danger of spontaneous explosion is still very high. Where are Maul and Anakin? My brother has thoroughly exhausted himself in an effort to keep the Executor off course. He is currently resting and quite unresponsive. The metadroids are confident that he will be on his feet again tomorrow. As for your son, physically he is well. He and Maul are both staying on my ship for the moment." "What do you mean, physically?" Vader snapped, not liking the sound of that. "There were complications," Fyril replied carefully. "I have yet to receive the full story myself, but apparently the Executor was being invaded by an unknown individual that managed to disable the heads of the droid crew, which left Maul on his own, handling the bridge. When the intruder engaged him in combat, Maul was unable to maneuver the ship, which led to it taking course for the planet, as the basic security was disabled together with the AI. Vader scowled. So it hadn't been Furno after all. It was all the work of the attacker, this other force presence he had felt on board the ship. What happened to the aggressor? He wanted to know. Fyril hesitated. Your son insisted he was to receive medical treatment. For some reason he believes the man to be his deceased Jedi master. Vader felt a spike of white-hot fury rise on him. Bad enough that Kenobi had survived the blackout and escaped his cell. Bad enough that Anakin had encountered him when he had never been meant to find out the man still existed. Kenobi had transformed into a twisted, wretched shadow of himself, going against everything his beloved Jedi Order stood for, tried to kill Vader, Anakin and millions of others, and the first thing Anakin did was get him medical treatment. That was, he couldn't even find words for it. When he had changed sides, when he had burned on the ground of Mustafar, horribly crippled in both body and soul, Kenobi had done nothing to help him. He had just left him there to burn, not even having the decency to finish him off. And now that Kenobi was just as much a monster as he had been in that moment, instead of shunning him or giving him a good kick, Anakin had helped him. Vader could no longer identify himself with the name Anakin Skywalker. He could no longer understand compassion or even forgiveness, but he knew there had been a time when he did. He knew there had been a time when there had been light in his heart. The knowledge that when Kenobi had still been his friend, he would have forgiven him anything, would have helped him even if he turned dark and tried to kill him, was making the betrayal 10 times worse. Evidently he hadn't meant as much to Kenobi as the Jedi had meant to him. His numerous torture sessions with the man during the lockdown has been a great stress relief. It had been very satisfying and even relaxing, but suddenly it seemed to Vader that all the pain he'd caused Kenobi hadn't been enough. It hadn't been nearly enough. Is the man conscious? Vader asked next. He is not. However, Skywalker is not leaving his side. Apparently his student had caught on to his line of thought. The Jedi had to be silenced before he could tell his son how he came to be stuck in the suit. Keep an eye on him. If he even so much as looks at you funny, you have full authorization to kill him. Yes, my master. As soon as Maul is better, I expect both of you to report to me personally. You are dismissed. Thank you, master. The holoimage died. Darth Vader looked over the Coruscanti skyline and contemplated his position. He had to prepare for the eventuality of Anakin finding out about Kenobi. Even if he killed the Jedi now, there would definitely be questions. If Anakin could confirm that man was indeed his former master, he would of course ask why he wore a suit identical to the one he'd found on the Executor. He would find out what he'd done to Kenobi. And he would hate Vader for it. Darth Vader growled angrily and began to pace the platform. Anakin hadn't been meant to find out. Maybe it had been foolish to give in to his dark desires like that. There was a lot depending on his younger self's approval, and now he had lost him forever. No, that was not true. Anakin had turned from him before at the beginning of the Clone Wars. This was no different. The man would hate him, sure, but Vader could live with that. He had been hated for the better part of his life. As long as his family was alive and happy, it did not matter that they hated him. And dang, but Kenobi had deserved it. Still, this called for a change of plans. Gone was the brilliant vision of building up the new Sith Order together with his younger self. He would be the villain once again. The Sith Lord snorted. That at least was something he was good at. Very well then. What did he want, what did he have, and how could he use the latter to get the former? He had achieved most of his goals that he had set himself when he first arrived in this time. Padme had survived. She and Anakin would live together, raise their children together. Darth Sidious would die. Not a glorious death, not even one to be remembered, but he would die eventually. There was no war. He was in a position to bring back peace and order to the galaxy. There remained around as much Jedi as Sith. Balance had been brought once again to the Force. That Anakin now hated him was unfortunate, but there was no reason why he couldn't use that for himself. Hatred would make him strong, and he needed to be strong to protect his family. The galaxy was conquered, Sidious defeated, his children strong and healthy. There was only one thing left to do. It was time to properly introduce Anakin to the dark side. XXX. Anakin sat slumped over on his chair, trying his best not to succumb to the sleep his body so desperately wanted. He had to stay alert. He wanted to be awake when Obi-Wan. Anakin swallowed hard. His eyes flickered over to the unmoving form in the bed in front of him, but he had to avert them quickly. The former Jedi still couldn't believe it. But he could sense the Force returning to his awareness stronger with each passing hour, and there was no denying that the armored man's presence was very familiar to him. He didn't know what horrified him more, his master surrounded by the dark side, or the fact that he had almost killed him in his anger himself. How often had he wished, prayed for a miracle, for his master to come back from the dead? How often had he wished he was there with him, giving counsel, to comfort him or just scold him? Now he was here again, but at the same time he wasn't. By the Force, what had happened to him? It was in that moment that the armored figure moved for the first time. Anakin was on his feet immediately, worry etched deeply into his face. Master? Please don't move too fast. You've been hurt pretty badly, he said, but could have slapped himself for his tactlessness a moment later. Hurt pretty badly. Yeah, right. Anakin, his master said as he sat up. It was impossible to tell just from his voice what he felt, what with the voice distortion and all that, but through their fragile, almost non-existent bond, he could feel a surprising flare of anger. His master was almost never angry, and when he was, the feeling vanished into the Force almost immediately. Not so now. Suddenly Anakin gasped as he felt invisible fingers around his throat. He stared with wide eyes at his master who'd raised his hand, danger radiating off him. You will tell me where Vader is, he said in that same dark voice devoid of emotion. Obi-Wan, what are you doing? He asked desperately, trying to fight against the invisible hold, not strong enough to keep him from talking, but still painful. You're hurting me, stop this. Tell me where Vader is. Instinctively Anakin shut his mouth, fully prepared to defend his father. Only to realize there was only one plausible reason why Obi-Wan would ask for his father. Evidently his intentions were not good, and the feelings of fury, pain and fear radiating off him only allowed one conclusion. What has he done to you? Anakin whispered with wide eyes. His father didn't, he couldn't possibly. Suddenly Obi-Wan was violently thrown away from him, and the hold around Anakin's neck vanished. The force push had ended with him on the ground as well, so he scrambled to his feet just as Feral entered the med room, glaring at his master quite murderously. He had a blaster pointed straight at him. "You picked the wrong guy to bother," he growled, his finger curling round the trigger. Anakin cursed. The youngest Sabrak chose the worst possible moment to get protective over his lord's son. Without a second to spare, Anakin rushed forward and stood before the form of his Jedi master, arms spread. "You don't get to hurt him. He's just a bit confused, I can take care of him myself. Kid, you force blind and exhausted. I'll clean up here, go and get some rest. Like heck I will. He's under my protection, so if you want to hurt him, you have to get through me first." For a moment it looked like Feral seriously considered doing just that. That lunatic is not leaving this room, he decided at last. Unless it's to move to the detention center. It's up to you to convince Lord Vader not to kill him for what he almost did. Anakin winced at the reminder, but he continued to stay strong. When he was gone and Anakin turned back to Obi-Wan, he found the man still slumped against the wall, his harsh breathing echoing in the empty room. "You didn't feel that protective over me when you told the clones to kill all Jedi," he accused blandly. Anakin stared at him, jaw dropped. What? You're with them? With Vader and the other Sith? You're a traitor." Anakin heard his own heart pounding. He felt so cold and he couldn't speak. "I should kill you where you stand. Stop it," he cried out, gripping his master's shoulders and shaking them slightly as if that would bring him back. "Master, listen to yourself. That's not you, it's the dark side, it's all over you." Obi-Wan made a coughing sound that Anakin belatedly recognized as laughter. "You don't get to tell me about the dark side, Anakin. Not you, Master. I am not your master. You are no student of mine." That hurt. Even more so after hearing his father say he didn't care if Anakin lived or died. Anakin couldn't believe his master was saying such cruel things. He had blamed himself for a long time for what happened to the Jedi Order, but hearing Obi-Wan accuse him of betrayal was a lot worse. "Crap," Anakin muttered when he had to turn around to hide the traitorous wetness of his eyes. He would not lose himself now. He had to stay strong. This wasn't the first time his whole world fell apart. He had to get through this. He had a family to return to after all. But he couldn't see Obi-Wan's face any longer. He had to get out of this room. Without looking back, Anakin left the med center, vaguely set on venting his chaotic emotions in a spar with one of the Zabraks, when he came across a most unusual sight in one of the control rooms. Through the window in the door he could see a little girl, just 6 or 7 years old, sitting in front of a terminal and seemingly playing with the controls. Frowning and very much searching for a distraction, the former Jedi entered. The girl seemed to play some kind of board game, directing differently colored spots between the levels of a 3-dimensional map. "What are you doing there?" Anakin asked. The girl flinched and turned to face him, bright green eyes staring at him. She opened her mouth to answer, but a couple of seconds went by before she actually did. There was a strange haze over her eyes that eerily reminded Anakin of victims of a Jedi mind trick. At last though, she merely smiled brightly. "I'm appointing droid squadrons to the cleanup and containment crews," she announced. "And why are you doing that?" He wanted to know, double-checking the display that the map did indeed greatly resemble the layouts of a Star Destroyer. The girl shrugged. "Feral said I should make myself useful, so I found myself a terminal and looked to see what I could do. My name's Bells, by the way. What's yours?" Anakin sat down on a chair next to her tiredly. "Anakin," he said. "Anakin," she repeated slowly, then smiled a bit brighter. "I like it." He chuckled a bit at her childishness. "What are you doing on this ship?" "I'm pointing." "No, I mean how did you get here?" "Oh? Well, I came here with a guy named Darth Maul. He said something about his master having to decide what happens to me." Anakin scowled a bit deeper. His father seemed to decide the fate of a lot of people lately. "What about your parents? Where are they?" "I don't really think I have any. I didn't even have a name until Maul gave me one." "Oh? She must be one of the Force sensitives living at the headquarters on Mallister." Anakin very much hoped she wouldn't get involved with the dark side. She looked just too innocent. "What about you? How did you get here?" Bells wanted to know. "If only I knew," he sighed. He was working with 2 Sith apprentices without being one himself. He wanted to save his father from the darkness, but he felt so angry and betrayed for what he'd done to Obi-Wan, that he felt soon he might be the one who needed saving. He had his master back who he thought lost, but instead of being elated about it, he had to fight hot burning tears at the mere thought of him. "My life's just really messed up right now," he muttered at last. "What will you do to make it right again?" He blinked at the girl a bit confused. That was a strange question to ask. "What? You look like a strong person," she said without missing a beat. "I know you will get out of whatever trouble you're in. How are you gonna do it?" He chuckled a bit. "I wish I had your confidence." "How do you know I'll make it?" She frowned a bit, looking to the side before returning her gaze to him steadily. "I just do. It's not that easy," he tried to explain. "People I care about are losing themselves. I want to pull them back, but I have to take care not to get dragged down with them instead. Then just hang on to a rope or something." Anakin had to think of Padme of the two tiny babies. Yeah, he said. I think I'm gonna do that. He smiled a bit. I have a wife, you know. She's the world to me. Is she beautiful? The little girl wanted to know. Yes, she is. The first time I saw her, I thought she was an angel. Elle tilted her head in confusion. What's an angel? He shrugged. They're said to be perfect beings, beautiful and mysterious. Mesmerizing. Elle smiled at him again. See? If you think about your wife like that, nobody is gonna drag you down. You can do it. You can do anything if you want. Anakin smiled at her with warmth. It was funny. He'd only met the girl a few minutes ago, but he already felt a bond to her, similar to the one he shared with his Padawan Ahsoka. He couldn't even feel the Force in her, though that could easily be owing to his senses still being off. There was just a lot of warmth and openness radiating from this child. Anakin averted his gaze, looking straight through the monitors. He was suddenly hit with a very strong wave of homesickness. He wished he could be with his wife and children right now. XXX, he's gone. Maul looked up at his brother casually leaning against the doorframe. He'd been in the middle of reassembling his lightsaber, and the metal parts and ruby crystal fell to the ground as his concentration broke. At last, he muttered and got to his feet. Master gave us permission to kill him, Fear reported, even as he fell in step with his brother. The Sith apprentice snorted. Of course he did. Not even Sidious came so close to killing our master. I'm honestly surprised he didn't insist on doing it himself. All the better for him though. Maul was seriously ticked off at that one of apprentice. That Skywalker insisted on protecting him was quite a bother, but now that he'd left the Cyborg site, there would be nothing protecting him from Maul's ire. It wasn't just the desire to finish a fight he'd begun. The idiot had tried to stab him in the back while he'd been holding on to the ship, trying to save all their necks. That was low, even for a Sith, and Maul took personal offense at that. Shortly before he reached the med room the attacker was being held in, Feral handed Maul a metal device. What's that? Maul wanted to know. The prosthetics of that guy are well, they're rubbish. He probably has to utilize the Force all the time just to move with him. Whoever gave them to him certainly didn't intend to do him a favor. Now they've been damaged in the fight. Suffice to say he can barely stand upright, so he's no danger anymore. But if you feel like torturing him some more, you can use this. During his treatment, the droids installed some additions to his limbs. This device will charge them with electricity precisely aimed at his pain receptors. A small smile curled around Maul's lips. That's quite creative. I like it. Just remember to keep your calm on. I will contact you if Skywalker returns. Our master doesn't seem to mind that this is going to cause a serious rift between them, but we should be careful. The boy is practically blind, what danger can he possibly pose? Maybe none, but remember that our Lord hasn't given us permission to kill him, which would make fighting him difficult. For now, just keep away from him. Granting that thing a quick death might be the best choice after all. I'll keep it in mind, Maul answered, but grabbed the device nonetheless. The Sith had barely closed the door behind him when there was a chair coming hurling at him through the air. Maul pushed it away with an annoyed grunt, and set his yellow eyes on the figure slumped against the medical bed. He probably tried to stand up only to realize quickly that he was in no condition to walk. Pathetic. You're really trying my patience, Maul spat and without a second thought, pressed a button on his torture device. With satisfaction he watched as the terrorist withered and trembled on the ground as electricity charged through his artificial limbs. It may not be the same as charging him up with his own lighting, but Maul knew that the technology installed worked far more precise than he ever could, so this would cause more pain for the prisoner. I don't know what you did to make Skywalker abandon you, Maul sneered, but it was a rather poor decision. There's nobody here to protect you now. It took a couple of seconds for the man, had he really been a Jedi at some point, to recover enough to be able to speak. When he did his voice was cold and emotionless, even though Maul could feel the anger and hatred radiating off him. It only irked him more. I do not need protection from a traitor. Maul laughed hollowly. That's rich, coming from a one-up Sith. Believe me, you need all the help you can get. I don't want to be a Sith, the prisoner said, the fierceness of the statement swallowed by the voice distortion. Vader took everything from me, he turned me into this thing. I will kill him for everything he's done, and if it's the last thing I do, and I will do it all on my own. Maul cocked his head, honestly curious now. Whatever his master had done to the Jedi, to be able to turn such a convinced adherent to the Jedi code into such a wretched monster in just a couple of weeks, was a feat to be admired. He would really like to know how he did that. Why? He asked at last. Aren't you Jedi always about teamwork? I can see why you would want to kill my master, even why you disregard the sacrifices to be made, but why insist on doing it alone? It's not like there's anybody else left, which is why it is all the more curious why you didn't try to pull Skywalker on your side. He would have never helped me. The words were as close to a mutter as he could get. Vader has his mind firmly confused. What he did to the Order only proves that. Now it seemed they were getting somewhere. A small cruel smile spread on Maul's lips as he leaned in a bit closer. You do realize that it was only because of Skywalker's actions that the Jedi Order survived at all, don't you? Kenobi lifted his helmeted head. What? Sidious had planned to execute Order 66 for a long time. Granted, that he used a recording of Skywalker's face to do so was unexpected. It was because the boy went to the Jedi Council and warned them from the clones that at least a minimum of preparation was carried out. It is only thanks to him that there are still a couple of hundred Jedi remaining and in hiding. Maul straightened his back, relishing in the shock he could feel from the Jedi. Of course you are quite right that none of them would help you in your quest to rid the world of the one man capable of ending the war and bringing peace. Especially not if you came to them looking like that, and with the dark side clinging to you. It was a recording. A trick. Anakin didn't betray the order. Not that I know of. But, the Jedi all but spluttered, Vader's training him. He's training him as his apprentice. Oh please, Maul scoffed. If that had been his intention, I'd have found a way to secretly dispose of the boy years ago. I do not appreciate being challenged for my position, you know. My master may have shown him the true power of the Force, but he's never encouraged him to use the dark side, and the boy has never shown any talent for it either. If Lord Vader wanted to turn him, first he would have to break him, and he has invested too much time and effort in him to destroy him now. For some reason he likes that his son is on the light side, even if it's just because he enjoys having a moderately challenging opponent. Their alliance is temporary and fragile at best. You probably just missed a very real chance to shatter it completely. Shame that is. The Jedi was silent for a moment, thoughts obviously racing. Maul grinned a little wider. Don't tell me, Jedi, he mocked, that you've shunned the light, gave in to your hatred, and been willing to abandon your precious code, all based on some carefully formulated misinformation. Is it really so easy to fool you? Master Jin would be disappointed. Kenobi let out a furious howl. He tried to land another attack on Maul, but his body was useless, and the Sith mercilessly made use of his device once again. Anakin, the beaten warrior, coughed with a raspy voice. What have I done? Yep, you kinda ruined it, Maul said happily. Wow, you probably broke some kind of record for the worst Jedi ever. Congratulations. Kenobi let out another pained cry. Maul almost felt a bit sorry for him. He knew the Jedi had once learned under Master Jin, who had later switched sides to serve Vader, and still did even in his death. Kenobi had been famous for his various successful negotiations, but now Maul had to ask himself how convinced he had really been of the things he did. With his own master changing sides and the many small hints Maul knew Vader had left for his son to pick up, he must have been one of the first to suspect a Sith in the Republic. That meant that his belief in his government as well as his trust in his order had always been on shaky ground. His Jedi code was probably all that kept him from breaking down. Vader thoroughly crushed that code. He'd used his attachment to his Padawan against him. He'd taken every chance for things like peace or serenity away from him by physically torturing him. It really wasn't surprising that without the code, Kenobi had succumbed pretty fast to his hatred. Lord Vader had exploited his weaknesses expertly, and though his methods sent a shiver down Maul's spine, he couldn't help but be impressed. Still, from the state he was in, it was rather obvious his master had not intended to use Kenobi any further, so that brought on the question on why he had gone to such lengths to turn him. That was the only thing Maul didn't understand, and the only that sparked a little doubt in his heart. Despite what their enemies believed, Lord Vader was never cruel for cruelty's sake. If that was the result of his master having too much free time, then Maul feared what would become of all those ambitious youths currently training to be his very own special force. You know, I fully intended to kill you, Maul said casually, giving the pathetic figure a good kick to get his attention. If just for the stunt you pulled on the SSD. But instead, I'm going to give you a choice. You can go the easy way and impale yourself on my lightsaber, or you can wait here for Skywalker to return. Who knows, maybe with his help, you'll find your way back to the light side. One condition though, you must let go of your hatred and abandon all thoughts of revenge. That's not the Jedi way. He smiled cruelly as he threw those words at him. At the inside though, he was gnawing his teeth. Maul honestly wasn't sure what would be worse. If Vader had turned Kenobi just because and would leave the two alone as long as they kept quiet, that could prove to be bad for the new Sith Order in the long run. If there was more of a backstory to it though, Maul couldn't think of any other reason to turn Kenobi than to use him to turn Skywalker as well. Zabrak really hoped that wasn't the case, as he rather liked his role as the first apprentice. The fact that his master had allowed him to kill Kenobi seemed to prove that his assumption was wrong. But he was well aware that if Skywalker ever came to challenge him for the post, his master may discard him. After all, the young man was his flesh and blood, while Maul had merely been picked up for convenience's sake. Despite his boasting not too long ago, he had always seen the threat in the young Jedi that resembled his master so much. Letting Kenobi live was a huge risk, but Maul simply had to know. He hated the feeling of not knowing what went on in his master's head, and he'd rather he was tested now, than having to worry for years, while his master derived another plan. With a snap his Maul activated his lightsaber and pointed it right at the former Jedi master. Well, what do you choose? Els was nervous. The last couple of days had been confusing at best. First she had woken up on a dead starship. Then she helped Maul to reunite with his fleet. Zabrak, she had researched his race on the holonet, had been a bit intimidating, but he'd been the only person she had some kind of connection to, and when he just left her on one of the other commander's ships, she had felt alone and sad and quite useless. She didn't like that feeling at all. She learned a bit more about the war outside, and the role of both Maul and his brother Fierl, but all it did was show her that there was no place for her in this world. She didn't fit in with these people, and yet she had absolutely no idea what a little girl like her was supposed to do, what her kind normally did. The brothers had just said their master would decide what would happen to her, but that man seemed to be rather busy. It had almost been a week and she still hadn't met him. Then there had been that nice stranger, Anakin. She'd met him only once and quite briefly too, but she had immediately liked him. He had looked sad and confused himself, but there was still something about him that told Bells he was a very strong person. He was an important person, someone who mattered. He had not dismissed her, instead, he'd taken the time to really talk to her, and she'd been happy in that moment. She also had a feeling as if she knew him. She didn't, of course, but she felt strangely drawn to him nonetheless. Anakin had been suffering, she could see that too, but she was convinced that whatever his problem was, he would manage it. Bells would like to help him, but she knew it wasn't really necessary. Whatever he wanted to do, he could do it without her, but it would be so exciting and wonderful to still be allowed to help him. It would be an honor. But there hadn't been much she could do except talk to him and cheer him up, so that's what she did. She'd shown him the layouts of the ship she found on the terminal, and for a couple of hours, they just talked about its technical advantages and weak points. After some time they had switched to droid mechanics, which was when Anakin really came out of his shell, and they discussed possible improvements in types of droids. Anakin had been impressed with her vast knowledge, and had praised her a lot for it, especially since she was so young. It had made her chest swell with pride. When Anakin had finally left, he insisted on taking her to the little room appointed to her where she slept. He thanked her for taking his mind off of his problems, and she'd made him promise to come visit her again sometime. It had been the happiest day of her short life. Today though, she was nervous. In the morning she'd been woken up by Maul and brought on board a shuttle where Fierl was already waiting. She wasn't told much, just that they were on their way to their master. They didn't get to meet Lord Vader immediately after landing though. The whole city seemed to be in a dizzy state of confusion and activity. There were a lot of droids around as well. As Bells was being moved along by the Zabrak brothers, she got a glimpse of a plaza with a giant crater and ruins of a building in the distance between two skyscrapers. That was not where they were going though. The little group was being accompanied by a squad of B-2 battle droids, and so the crowd of people who seemed to just stand on the streets waiting for something parted for them readily. Eventually they reached a broad street with hundreds of white armored men standing guard and keeping the people at bay. Some of them were shouting angrily, some just staring ahead tiredly, some angry, some resigned, some expectant. There was music playing in the background, a military march that made Bells walk a bit straighter just by listening to it. More droids filled the street in what the girl now recognized was a parade. Their march led straight up to a towering building in the distance. Bells could barely see anything as she was surrounded by droids 3 times her size, so she almost missed it when the succession stopped. As if they were one person, Maul and Fierl smoothly got on one knee and bowed in a practiced move. Bells had to stand on her toes and stretch to look beyond the bulking steel bodies, obscuring her view to see what they were bound to. There was a balcony just high enough to oversee the crowd, and on top of it stood a man in black robes. He spread his arms, and Bells felt a shiver run down her spine, as she clearly felt something pass over her. At once, the noise from the crowd grew quiet. Bells jumped a little to get a good view of the man's face, and she managed a glimpse just as he began to speak. Suddenly the world of the little girl slid sideways. She was unable to focus on anything else other than the face of the Sith Lord. Fearlessly she slipped between the droids to get a better view, and then just stood there, staring, her mouth open in wonder. He was perfect. Bells had seen a number of humans, men and women on board Fierl's ship, but this man was unlike any of them. On some level Bells was aware that he resembled Anakin a great deal, but his features were emitting a much greater inner strength. His hair and eyes and skin seemed to glow in much livelier colors, and his posture spoke of power that went far beyond the strange tingles she'd felt in Anakin's presence. He was a god. Bells was so awed by the emotions rushing through her, she missed the beginning of his speech. Immediately she felt guilty, even desperate because he was speaking to her. She was given the glorious gift of hearing his voice, and she had failed to pay attention to his message. It was hard to focus on anything other than the awe-inspiring side of him. Bells felt such warmth and wonder at just looking at him. It was similar, but on a completely different level as the companionship she'd felt with Anakin or even Maul at times. But she had to listen to his words, for it would undoubtedly be a very important message. Not allow further bloodshed to spread around the galaxy. Both the Senate of the Republic and the Clone Army have accepted their defeat. I have no intention to punish you for being misled by a corrupt chancellor. You have been defeated, but you will be treated fairly. It will not be easy to overcome the animosity of these last years. So much hatred has been sown, it will be hard for so many opposing systems to reconcile. Your Senate has failed multiple times in negotiating such a peace. This clearly shows that the current democracy is unfit and ineffective in the face of such a challenge. A firm hand is needed to bring back order to a galaxy drowning in chaos. That is why today I declare Coruscant and the rest of the 180 million star system of this galaxy to be under the rule of the Galactic Empire. There will be no more long, useless debates, no more indecision and no corruption. Whether a bill proposed by the appointed senators of former Republic or Separatist systems is passed or not will be for only one person to decide. I will be your final judge and executor. I will be your emperor. At this point, the noise started up again amongst the crowd. Bells desperately wished they would just shut up so she wouldn't miss any more of what her master had to say. She didn't understand completely what his words meant. She hadn't been aware that there was such chaos across the galaxy, though she faintly remembered Maul mentioning something like that. It must be truly terrible if her master deemed it worthy of his attention. Oh, those people were so lucky to be granted the honor of having Lord Vader know, Emperor Vader care for them. Wait, but she belonged to these people too, didn't she? He said he would treat all beings fairly, whether they were Republic or Separatist. Bells didn't know where she came from, but she was reasonably sure she was from this galaxy, so she too would now be under Emperor Vader's rule. If she wasn't still so stunned by her master's presence, she might have whooped in joy. Beside her, the Zabrak brothers rose to their feet. Did you know any of this? She heard Firo mutter without moving his head. No, Maul answered between clenched teeth. But does it really surprise you? Not really, the other admitted. The two started to march up the sides of the building, Firo absent-mindedly motioning for Bells to follow him. She stayed at the bottom of the stairs, while the generals got to stand at either side of the Emperor. Oh, she wished so much to be in their place, to be able to be close to him. Emperor Vader. Truly, a title worthy of such shining and glorious being. The Emperor spoke again, introducing the Zabrak brothers as his second and third in command respectively. He spoke of the rule he intended to put them under. How there were to be military outposts in every system to strictly control the governance and law, and how those stepping out of line would be put under military rule until their loyalty could be assured. The clones would be integrated into the Empire's forces. He even addressed the Jedi still in hiding somewhere. They were invited to come back and return to the temple the corrupt Chancellor had driven them from as long as they swore their loyalty to him and the Empire, and agreed to serve him faithfully. Nobody would be persecuted for fighting against the Separatists while adhering to Republic law during the Clone Wars, but any attack on the Empire would be punished severely and resolutely. Bells listened with rapture to every word, and when the speech was over, she fervently joined in the hesitant applause of the crowd with jubilant clapping. 20 minutes later, Bells stood bouncing on her heels in the corner of Emperor Vader's improvised throne room. He was giving orders to his generals. Bells was being held back by the escort droids. She didn't dare draw attention to herself, but she was just so nervous and expectant, she barely kept herself from rushing forward. Maul, you will go and see to it that the Separatist Council goes along with the new government. If they prove to be reluctant, make an example of them. I want their official support to be declared within the next 2 days. Maul bowed deeply. Yes, my master. Vader turned to Firo. You will go to the academy and inform the rest of our order of the new development. General Grievous will be pleased to hear that he is being put in charge of the droid army, and in control of fighting off planetary rebellions, that will no doubt start soon. What about the academy itself, master? Jin will stay in control of it for now. The place is still to be kept a secret, especially from the Jedi. There will be a lack of teaching staff for the duration of the transition, but that cannot be helped. I need you to be in charge of the Jedi hunt for those that decide to stir up trouble and Maul to further expand the fleet and organize the integration of the clones. The Emperor looked at the Zabraks seriously. I have taught you well, my students. You have proven yourselves during the previous war, but our work has only just begun. The power is ours. Under our combined rule, order will return to the galaxy, and we will leave our mark on history. Yes, my master, the Zabraks echoed. Master, Maul began with a scowl, what about your son? The Emperor was silent for a moment. Anakin will have to make his decision soon, he said at last. Whether he is with or against us. You have not yet executed the attacker, have you? Maul's lips thinned. No, master. I will make up for it personally if you so wish. No, the Emperor interrupted him. He does not provide an immediate threat. Send a signal to the ship that he is to be executed, but I need you to take off immediately. Now. The Emperor's eyes wandered from his apprentices and slewed towards Bells for the first time. Why don't you tell me who you've brought with you? The small two turned towards Bells, who couldn't for the life of her take her eyes off their master. Is a survivor of the blackout, master. She woke up on the Executor with no memories. I have brought her before you for examination. She looks harmless enough on first glance, but has displayed an astonishing talent to work spacecraft software. The hidden message in those words went completely unnoticed by the little girl, but the Sith Lord caught on at once. At first he had dismissed the child, as a superficial probe told him she had no sensitivity for the Force whatsoever. He could sense no danger coming from her, and though it was curious that his apprentices would bring such a young girl before him, he had more important matters to work on. Now though Maul was suggesting there might be a connection between the child and the late AI of the Executor, and that definitely caught his interest. Vader took the time to make eye contact with Maul, who upon being nudged by his master's mind, hesitantly opened up to him. Vader drifted through the memory of the last few days of his apprentice with little resistance from the Zabrak. He lingered a bit longer on the episode of his second meeting with Kenobi, amused at the pain he'd caused, but slightly irritated that in the end, he'd let him go. Mainly however he concentrated on his memories of the child Bells they called her, and soon he could see how his apprentice had drawn his conclusions. Shifting his attention away from the Zabrak, Vader focused on the girl itself. For a moment he was slightly unnerved by her intense stare. He understood that this was not normal behavior for her. Maul had been able to confirm that she was 100% organic, except for one tiny microchip embedded in her skull that had turned up on a medical scan and held similarities to the infamous inhibitor chip of the clones. "Come here, child," Vader commanded in a rather deep, intimidating voice. The eyes of the girl lit up like Tatooine's twin suns, and she practically ran up to his throne, and to Vader's surprise and irritation, she flung herself at him with gusto, hugging his legs and smiling up at him, as if he was the candy lady offering her a year's worth of sweets for free. Vader had to throw a murderous glare at his apprentices who were trying to hide their smiles. Still scowling fiercely, Vader reached out with his mind anew, this time delving into the girl's thoughts and emotions. What he felt from her, though, it left him momentarily stunned. There was so much happiness and warmth, and adoration bordering on worship, awe and respect and pride at being allowed near him, and there was that love. Vader drew back quickly as if burned, and he pushed the girl clinging to him away slightly, as if to muster her. He felt shaken. It had been years since he'd felt such pure feelings directed at him. Since the last time he'd seen Shmai, to be exact. Only that this child was giving off feelings 10 times as strong. He doubted even Padme had felt that strongly towards him, though the memory was blurry by now, and her love had been of an entirely different kind. The fact that he had done nothing to warrant such adoration just made him more uncomfortable. Except if there was really at least a part of Bellatrix Furno saved on the chip inside the girl's head, it would explain a lot. Her large gaps in knowledge in terms of anything not related with warfare and spacecraft for one, as well as the sudden switch in behavior upon seeing him. Furno must have ensured that her new self would recognize him, not by name, but by appearance and probably voice, which would open a new stream of information detailing her relation to him. She had ensured that her new self would be loyal and useful to him first, and thus had sacrificed any personal characteristics that made out her personality. Searching further through her mind, Vader could detect very little of the original AI in the child, just the knowledge and a predefined bond to him. The rest was basically just a newborn, blank mind inside of a body filled with the hormones of a little girl. At first Vader had thought her to be the rebirth, in a way, of the AI, but she really was more like Furno's daughter. Which was actually a bit of a scary thought, especially with her looking up at him like he was her. Vader stopped the thought right there. The self-appointed emperor cleared his throat and mentally thanking Fierl for taking the girl by the hand and gently pulling her away from him, though it made her pout. Very well. She may stay here with me for now. He would appoint some droids to teach her basic stuff and keep an eye on her, until he had more time to properly examine that chip, and see if she could pose a threat later on. For now he had other things to deal with, mainly, his rebellious son. You have done well to bring this to my attention. That will be all. As the Zabrak brothers took their leave, Vader's gaze passed over the girl standing before him. Her pure mind seemed to constantly but subconsciously try to latch onto his to form a bond, even though it was a dark, ugly thing that would rebuff her naturally. It was strangely heart-melting, and even managed to bring a small smile to his lips. Bells grew confident when he didn't send her away and moved to sit down by his feet, one hand fastening on the hem of his black robe with a contented sigh. She looked up at him with big trusting eyes and asked, "Are you an angel?" And in that moment, through the hard shell of cold ice surrounding Vader's heart and mind, a shell grown through years and decades of being nurtured by the dark side, went a long and painful crack. Anakin Skywalker closed the door behind him and dropped the remains of the Droideka on a small pile of scrap metal. He searched through the assembled droid parts, until he found the spare part he needed before stepping towards the stretcher. On top of it laid the torso of his master, who was wheezing through his black mask. "You know," Anakin said almost casually, "it would be a tremendous help if you could breathe a little quieter." The whole ship was searching for the escaped prisoner, and all the droids had been ordered to kill the cyborg on sight. Anakin had been there with him when the first droids entered, and he hadn't hesitated to cut them down with his lightsaber. But Obi-Wan was gravely injured, and he had been forced to find an unoccupied room and stabilize him, before he could even attempt an escape. Obi-Wan raised his head a little. He had refused any painkillers, and so had been conscious, while Anakin removed his prosthetics in order to repair them. "If it weren't for those droids finding us, you wouldn't have enough spare parts," he argued. Anakin thought it was a rather pathetic attempt to tease him, as his master used to do when he'd still been a Padawan. But at least he did make the attempt, and that brought a smile to his lips. "True," he said, and used the force to connect the wires with expert precision. "Here you go," he muttered. "Not exactly professional craftsmanship, but it will get you out of here." He moved over to his master. Anakin was trying not to look at the black mask as he connected the newly built arm to the metal socket at his torso. Obi-Wan flexed his metallic muscles and gave a vague sound of approval. The rest is less damaged. I should be able to repair it more quickly, the former Jedi said, and turned to continue his work. For a moment silence returned as there was little his master could do to help him. Eventually though he began to speak. Why are you doing this, Anakin? The young man didn't look up from his work. Doing what? Why are you helping me? I said some terrible things to you. Well, yeah. You also said you were sorry. But I doubted you. I allowed Vader to make me believe. Anakin muttered something too silent for Obi-Wan to hear. Finally he threw away the tool he'd been using. It's not like I'm not used to it, he ground out. Anakin. The former Jedi turned around abruptly, glaring at the helpless figure. Do you think it was easy? Being your Padawan, the son of a Sith Lord in an order that despised everything not purely light. How often have you told me how important it is that I do not fall, that I have to reject my father and everything he taught me? How often did you give me that look when I felt just the tiniest bit of anger? I could feel your fear. You were constantly waiting for me to go off on a murdering rampage. The council didn't allow you to teach me because I had some potential. They did it so they could control me, and you have made sure to let me feel that on every step of the way. He was breathing heavily now, a dam of emotion threatening to break. It was not dang easy, he shouted. It was hard, alright, to always feel like I'm a disappointment to you. And after what happened with Master Jin on Geonosis, I knew I couldn't disappoint you. I knew it would destroy you. But nobody ever expected me to succeed, and yet I'm still here. I'm not a tool. I'm not a weapon. I'm a person. I'm Anakin and I'm sick of being dismissed with some label, be it light or dark. The young man threw a frustrated glare in Obi-Wan's direction. Yeah, I'm disappointed that you didn't believe in me. I don't like that you tried to kill millions of innocent civilians, not to mention myself. But I'm going to forgive you. Eventually. Not because I'm a Jedi because, well, I'm not. But that's the kind of thing you do between friends. Obi-Wan was silent for a long moment, digesting the hard, but oh so true words of his former Padawan. Finally he asked, are you going to forgive Vader too? Pain flashed across Anakin's expression. He didn't look at his master, instead gathering up the other arm, and moving to connect it to the Jedi's torso. I don't know, he finally admitted. I don't know if I can. I'm so angry at him. But I know that you will have to forgive him. Obi-Wan stiffened and not from the pain of having the prosthetic attached. I will never. You have to, Obi-Wan. My senses are terribly off balance and severely dulled right now, but even I can sense the darkness in you. If you ever want to get back to the light, if you ever want to have any chance at healing, you will have to forgive him. If you don't, you will forever be lost to the dark side. You will forever remain a prisoner of my father. You must let go. Obi-Wan hesitated, feeling the urge to bite his lips, but being stopped by the cursed apparatus. Even now the hatred in him was so strong. It didn't seem possible to ever forgive Vader. The torture, maybe he could have set aside. But the emotional pain inflicted on him over years by that man, simply could not be forgotten. He didn't want to forgive, but he also felt a deep primitive yearning for the feeling of peace the light used to bring him. He needs to be stopped, he said at last. It was hard, sorting out his intense emotions and separating them from his practical viewpoint. He is a danger to the galaxy, I know. But he won't be stopped by you. Anakin finished the work on his arm and turned to do some last repairs to the leg prosthetic. He had to build it completely anew after Vader's apprentice had his little chat with Obi-Wan. First we'll have to get off this ship. I still have my codes, with some luck we'll get through the blockade without anyone noticing. No? This might be our only chance to stop Vader before he does any more damage. Anakin snorted. Well, he's in the middle of an invasion with both his apprentices at his side and an entire fleet at his command in orbit. I think this is the worst possible moment to engage him. No, we need to retreat. I fixed these up as best as I could, but you need to get to a proper hospital. He won't let us escape. Vader controls practically the entire galaxy by now. We don't know where the surviving Jedi are, and even if we did, we couldn't risk leading Vader to them. Whichever planet we decide to hide on is just going to get invaded. Anakin smiled a little. Yeah, but there's one exception to that. One planet that is guaranteed to grant us asylum and with a representative ruler that not even Darth Vader would dare to offend by sending any troops. Obi-Wan was very skeptical, though the sentiment was lost as he asked in his monotone, mechanical voice. And who would that be? Now Anakin's smile was definitely mischievous. Why, my mother of course. XXX, Anakin had rushed forward with a large, relieved smile. Anakin caught her, wrapping his arms tightly around her and burying his face in her hair, just letting her presence wash over him. He sighed, feeling like the first time in ages like coming home. Obi-Wan had stopped awkwardly at the entrance, watching the couple. It took Anakin a tremendous amount of willpower just to let go of his wife and greet the other two women approaching them. Shmi Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano were smiling at him as well, though his former Padawan was shooting the occasional worried glance at the towering figure of his master. Anakin went to give them both a hug as well, and whisper, "Don't worry about him," in Ahsoka's ear. Once the number of systems conquered by the Separatist fleet had reached 5 digits, Vader had started to appoint governors loyal to him or his cause, to either rule or control the present rulers of the planets, so they would stay loyal, and to assure communication with the rest of the army went smoothly. Since Tatooine had been ruled by criminals for a long time, Vader had taken care to essentially crush all remains of the Hutt regime, before instating his mother as the sovereign ruler. Her authority had only been officially recognized a year ago, partly because the subdued woman had no intention of taking the post at the beginning. His father had sent a lot of his best men to help her, and eventually her compassion wouldn't allow her to do nothing when she had the means to free the slaves, and make the hard life on the planet a bit more bearable. Not all criminals and pirates had been driven away, but Shmai had managed to hire a lot of them, giving the mother means to earn money without having to risk their lives on a daily basis. Her job was not easy, but she had grown with the challenge, and did her best to transform Tatooine into a respectable planet. Anakin had sent Ahsoka and his family to her, partly to help her, but mostly because he knew his father wouldn't search for them here, and even if he did, he wouldn't go against Shmai. "Ani, it's so good to see you again," his mother said when he hugged her. "It's good to see you too," he replied with a smile. "You look wonderful." It was true. His mother looked healthy and happy, wearing some light brown and white robes. They were modest in design, but from fine quality. The difference to the large gowns Padme had worn when she had been queen couldn't be more obvious, but to Anakin she was just as beautiful. "How are the children?" he wanted to know. "They miss you," Padme replied. "They'll be so happy to see you. Please tell me you will stay with us now." "I'll stay with you," he promised immediately, the thought of his children making his heart skip. Then he threw a look back at Obi-Wan. "I don't know for how long, but yes, I'll stay with you for now." Ahsoka stepped forward now, scrutinizing the black saber. "Anakin, is that?" she asked hesitantly, undoubtedly feeling his presence. "It's a long story," he sighed. "It's kinda important nobody knows we're here." He looked questioningly at his mother, who nodded reassuringly. They got out of the entrance hall of the small manor his family now lived in. Anakin went to see the twins who were greeting him with babbling laughter. For half an hour nobody could really get him to do anything but playing with the babies, tickling them and holding them up in the air to their delight. It was like a ton of worries and stress fell away around him, and all the pain and suffering he had gone through during the last 4 years had been worth it just for those 2 shining lights. Eventually he rejoined the woman. Shmai's husband kept a respectful distance, and began to retell what had happened since they had left the headquarters on Mallister. Shmai was appalled at hearing what had happened to his former Jedi master, though Ahsoka didn't look surprised. Padme was scared and more adamant than ever not to let that man anywhere near her children. "Why would he do something like that?" Shmai asked, honestly confused. He knows that you two mean a lot to each other. Vader is far past the point where he would care," Obi-Wan spat furiously, though it came out as a monotone through his mask. Opposite of him Ahsoka shifted uneasily, feeling the dark waves of hatred rolling off him. "I can't believe he would do something like that without reason," Shmai protested. Her gaze was suddenly wary. "What have you done to make him so angry?" "He's done nothing," Anakin said before his master could protest. "Father is being controlled by the dark side." "I don't know," she said skeptically. "I don't think he would allow that to happen again." "Again?" The woman winced and looked away. "I shouldn't say anything." "Mrs. Skywalker," Ahsoka said gently, "if there is anything you know you have to tell us." "What with the declaration and all, chances are soon he won't listen to any of us anymore." "What declaration?" Anakin asked. "What happened?" Everyone was silent for a moment, which was alarming. "You haven't heard yet." Padme sat and laid a calming hand on his when panic began to rise in him. "Heard what?" Shmai sighed and moved to turn on a holo receiver. She switched the channels until she found a news channel. The images projected on the wall showed Coruscant and a Twi'lek reporting on. "Emperor?" Obi-Wan called out, rising so fast his chair was falling over. "He declared himself Emperor. He can't do that. Technically both the Republic and the Separatists have essentially been under dictatorship for the last 2 years at the very least," Ahsoka reminded them. "But an empire," Anakin said. "My father doesn't really count as a politician, and I know he hasn't spent any significant time with the Separatist Council or any advisors. How would he even go about changing the governmental system this drastically on such a short notice? We have the Chancellor to thank for that," Padme explained with a dark look. "The amount of emergency power he had is ridiculous. The erection of an empire looks like something he would be capable of doing. It was clear to me as soon as I heard that he was really a Sith Lord and manipulating the Clone Wars all the time. I'm sure the empire was his idea, all the plans already worked out, and Vader simply took over." The mention of Darth Sidious pulled Anakin's attention back to the holo. It was only then that he noticed exactly what the report was on. Vader was holding a public execution of the former Chancellor. The reporter was in the back of the crowd, but even so, Anakin could see how weak and battered the former Sith Lord looked as he was dragged on a stage-like platform. Darth Vader was sitting on a throne-like chair on a balcony overlooking the stage. Without the ability to use the Force and with his arms and feet chained, the Sith Lord was positively helpless. He seemed to spit something that Anakin couldn't hear at Vader. His back was turned to a line of clones holding blaster rifles, and Anakin recognized them to be a firing squad. It certainly was galactic karma that Sidious should be killed by the clones he had forced to go against their friends and generals. Vader raised his hand, looking down at the defeated Sith with a sneer. Then his hand rushed down, and Darth Sidious fell in a shower of red blaster bolts. The crowd cheered. "Maybe it's not so bad," Shmai said hesitantly. "That man is the cause of this terrible war, isn't he? Tatooine and a lot of other planets in the Outer Rim have flourished ever since they were liberated. Maybe the galaxy needs this empire. It's a dictatorship." Padme protested immediately. "The end of the democracy, the end of the free will. The democracy wasn't working anymore," Shmai said sadly. "Maybe the Republic was just supposed to fall. I would allow Vader to enslave and suppress all beings in the galaxy. You know that's what he would do. Look how he treated poor Master Kenobi. The galaxy cannot be allowed to fall into the hands of a madman," Obi-Wan agreed hotly. "I'm just saying that there might be more to this than you see," Shmai replied sadly. "He is not a cruel man. He just does what he thinks is best." Obi-Wan made a rasping sound, unable to properly express his mirthless laughter. "Not a cruel man? I dare object on that one, madam. You don't know him like I do. You don't know how he's been. He's lost his way, mother," Anakin whispered. "Obi-Wan is right. He cannot be allowed to wield such power." Shmai looked torn. "Maybe I can talk to him. Maybe if I..." "No," Anakin objected immediately. "If you contacted him now it would draw attention, and he would almost certainly discover that we're hiding here. Mom, he tried to have Obi-Wan killed. We had to flee from his ship, and had to jump all over the galaxy to loose our tails. Please, it's too dangerous." "What do you want to do now?" Ahsoka asked. Anakin exchanged a look with his master before answering. "We have to rest for a week or two. Obi-Wan needs to regain his strength, and I have to reconnect with the Force. After that we will move to confront my father." He threw a look at the Jedi. Together. While he was still adamant that Obi-Wan must not give in to his desire to have revenge, he was objective enough to realize that he would need his help if the confrontation resulted in a fight, which with his luck, it would most certainly do. Padme squeezed his hand reassuringly, and he gave her a small smile. "Promise me you'll be back," she whispered pleadingly. "What Vader is doing is terrible, but I would gladly endure it 10 times over if I just have you at my side. Please don't do anything reckless." "Of course not, you know me," Anakin replied. After all, he had always come back to her. But Padme was just frowning more. "Yes, I know you. That's why I worry." Darth Vader smiled thinly, taking in the figures in front of him. They had not yet ignited their lightsabers, for they were held ready. "I was wondering when you would turn up," he said. Outwardly he was relaxed, but he was already drawing on the dark side, preparing for a fight. "However, I'm afraid I don't have time to deal with you now. I'm waiting for someone else, you see." It was a week after the Empire had been declared and he was eagerly awaiting the final showdown. These Jedi were nothing but a nuisance to him. Master Yoda's gimmer stick hit the ground with a thump, his presence filling the room with authority and power. "Allow you to suppress the galaxy, we cannot, Sith Lord. And today, your tyranny will." Behind the tiny master, 4 other Jedi ignited their sabers. Mace Windu was there, unsurprisingly, along with Kit Fisto, Plo Koon, and Shaak Ti. "I honestly do not know why you insist I be your enemy," Vader replied with a mocking tone. "I avenged your people. I am bringing back peace and order to the galaxy. I even offered to help rebuild what you've lost. I am doing your job, and instead of kneeling before me and thank me for allowing your pathetic religion to continue to exist, you ambush me in my quarters in the middle of the night, outnumbering me in a time when my apprentices are gone. That's not just stupid and ungrateful, it's shameful. It really is no wonder that your order fell." He drew his own lightsaber, the red blade glowing ominously. "My master killed 3 of you in less than a minute," Vader muttered with a small cruel grin. "Let's see if I can break that record." The Jedi charged at him. They had taken on a formation that would let them utilize teamwork and their respective strengths to the maximum. With a rush of speed, Vader slipped to the side. There was not much furniture around that he could use to fling at the Jedi. Out of the group, Yoda had the most experience fighting Vader, and thus was the greatest threat. The others were less prepared. Plo Koon was the first to go. He was standing closest to the next wall. Vader feinted an attack with his saber at his head. His battle precognition failed the Jedi, and so he was unprepared for the sudden switch to a force push that pressed him against the wall. That itself wouldn't have been lethal if Vader had aimed precisely at the mass covering the lower half of the Caldor. With a sickening crunch, the metal was being driven into the Jedi's skull, killing him instantly. While the Force would not help the Jedi to predict Vader's moves, the Sith Lord was not limited in the same way. Without looking, he switched his saber to a reverse grip to block the incoming blow of Master Fisto. While turning, he sent a powerful wave of dark side energy at the Jedi. It wasn't a physical push, and it wasn't lighting energy either, just a wave of concentrated hatred that attacked the Jedi's mind. It shattered his concentration for a moment, enough for Vader to plunge his lightsaber into his chest. His weapon stuck in the body. Windu and Shaak Ti used his supposed lack of maneuverability to attack together. Yoda had jumped back, undoubtedly to prepare something big. Vader sneered at the 2 Jedi who could shrug off the death of their comrades this easily. There were nothing but tools in his eyes, greatly resembling the Emperor's hands, brainwashed underlings who would fight to the death no matter what, stubborn in their loyalty to a man or a code that had long since failed them. Vader easily abandoned his lightsaber and jumped up. He used the Force to draw the wall towards him, not strong enough to destroy it, but just so there was a definite pull. A pull that allowed his feet to stick to the vertical surface. He didn't take the time to enjoy the Jedi's astonished expressions, instead raising his hands and letting a stream of lightning crash down on them from his fingertips. Windu was fast enough to raise his saber and block most of the charge, but the Executor was hit with the full force, twitching and screaming in agony as the electricity coursed through her body. He ended the attack with a force push which gave him enough time to call his lightsaber back to him. The Executor Master was still too weak to move swiftly, and failed to avoid the red blade smoothly decapitating her. Windu was at his back in an instant, and their sabers clashed, the two warriors facing each other for a moment, while pushing with all their strength. "What do you say?" Vader mocked him. "I believe I did break the record after all." Windu let out an angry shout and attacked with a series of quick strikes and slashes. Vader was momentarily forced on the defense, but his ability to predict the Jedi's movements while still being able to feint himself gave him an advantage. Vader felt the power build up all around him, and he drew stronger onto the dark side to protect himself. When the Jedi jumped, he knew that whatever Yoda had been doing was going to come crashing down at him. He was right. The solid steel walls of the room suddenly began to bend. Normally when controlling something this big, the movement would be very slow as it required a lot of concentration. But the little Jedi had waited until he had full control, and now he was rapidly peeling the steel plating off the walls, causing it to wrap around Vader and trap him. Momentarily disabled, Vader focused on another kind of attack. He threw his mind at the two Jedi, sharpened to knife point, and drove all his hatred and anger into their hearts. Windu screamed out loudly, dropping his lightsaber in favor of clutching his head, and Yoda gave a pain moan. Still his concentration didn't waver. In fact, the metal holding Vader began to press against him, threatening to crush his body. Vader's eyes flickered to the top, and he caused the chandelier to crush down on the Jedi Grandmaster. With a gasp, Windu managed to regain enough of his senses to push the improvised missile to the side, preventing Yoda from having to release his hold on Vader. Feeling ticked, the Sith Lord now instead lifted Windu himself with the Force. It was harder without having his hands free to direct the attack, but he had so much experience with that particular move it didn't really matter. Windu began to choke and claw at his throat fruitlessly. On the other end of the room, the lightsaber Vader had dropped when the steel wrapped around him was now lifted into the air as well. Jedi and saber were now floating on either side of Master Yoda, who was still doing his best to crush Vader's bones. When the weapon started to race right at the other master though, Yoda finally gave up and released the steel plating in order to save his last remaining comrade. Darth Vader released a powerful force wave in all directions, causing his prison to explode and send scrap metal flying. Windu was now kneeling at his feet, coughing loudly. With a flick of his hands, Vader caught his own lightsaber in his right and Windu's violet blade in his left hand. It was time to end this. Yoda ignited his own green saber. Undoubtedly he had avoided getting into a close-range fight, remembering how that had ended last time. Vader didn't give him time to prepare though. He opened the fight by throwing Windu's lightsaber at him, the blade spinning wildly. Not counting on his attack connecting, Vader used his now free hand to shatter the panorama window Yoda stood in front of. Hundreds of sharp glass pieces attacked the Jedi from behind. The green being released a force wave of his own, but the shards weren't merely hurled at him. Vader had a firm grip on every single piece and pressed forward with his entire mind. The force wave pushed him back at first, but as Yoda had expected the shards to drop after that, he didn't bother to keep up a steady wave of pressure, which would have taken a ridiculous amount of power anyway. The moment the wave dissipated, the shards simply drove on. The Green Master fought against his initial surprise, and tried to ward off the glass with his lightsaber, but every piece he deflected simply stopped in its trajectory after a few inches, and rushed back at him to try again. Yoda was soon surrounded by a small whirlwind of glass shards, more and more getting through his defense and piecing his flesh. His blade whirled around crazily, leaving after images and almost looking as if he was encased by a green sphere. But he was handling a sword, not a shield, and his advanced age didn't allow him to reach the ridiculous speed that would have been necessary to get out of the whirlwind unscratched. All this hand happened in just a few seconds in which Vader had been concentrating hard. He only broke off the attack when Mace Windu caught himself and tried to attack him with nothing but his fists. Vader slashed at him with his red lightsaber, causing Windu to jump back. He lifted up Shakti's lifeless body and hurled it at him for good measure. While it wasn't heavy, the pure shock of being confronted with his comrade's dead body caused him to be in a stupor long enough for Vader to raise his hands to the ceiling. It had lost lots of its protection when Yoda peeled off the steel plating, and the raw wires connecting various lamps and devices in the room were now bare. Vader took a hold of them and like animated snakes they rushed forward, winding around Windu's arms and legs, and trapping him aloft. Suddenly the door behind Vader sprung open and a squad of battle droids rushed in. "My lord, we heard some noise. Do you require help?" Perfect, more cannon fodder, Vader muttered as he promptly grabbed one of the droids with the Force and hurled it at Yoda, who was getting to his feet with blood dripping everywhere. The droid actually recognized the Jedi as a threat and fired his blaster at him, making for a very dangerous missile. Yoda of course swatted it away like a fly, but it provided enough cover for Vader to close the distance between them in a surprise attack. Their sabers clashed and for a moment the old Jedi actually eyed the window and the Coruscanti traffic beneath. But Vader knew he would not dare to flee. Not while Windu was hanging helpless in the wires, guarded by the rest of the droid squad. It was the only reason Vader hadn't finished him off yet after all. What followed was a fierce duel between the Grand Master of the Jedi and the Dark Lord of the Sith. Their lightsabers moved so fast they became a blur to all onlookers. Vader utilized his superior strength and made heavy use of the Force, tugging at Yoda's saber hilt, his feet or his robes to destroy his balance. Even though he had witnessed the deaths of his fellow masters, Yoda was still perfectly attuned to the light side, and used his small height and the Force to increase his speed and agility. He could not predict Vader's movements with the Force, but for an experienced duelist like him, it was easy to get similar results simply from observing his opponent's body language. Thus for a couple of long minutes, they were evenly matched. Vader saw an opening in the Jedi's defense and jumped right at it. With a ferocious strike his lightsaber slashed through Yoda's right arm, smoothly cutting it off. He had a split second to smugly think that this cutting people's limbs was becoming a habit of him, when the Force screamed a warning at him. Completely ignoring the pain, Yoda had switched his lightsaber to his other hand to strike directly at Vader's heart. In his arrogance the Sith had thought the fight almost won already. He couldn't believe that the Jedi was really so embedded in the Force as to ignore such pain. He knew what it felt like after all, and not only that, but to actually sacrifice his arm, just to get the chance to strike at him clearly. Because, he realized, that was exactly what Yoda had done, leaving a hole in his defense on purpose to bait him. But unlike the Jedi, Vader did have the Force on his side. He was able to predict the action, but he was just too stunned to react in time. The green lightsaber still managed to brush him as he moved back just a quarter of a second too late. The Sith Lord let out a scream of pain and fury when his torso was being slashed open, the blade delivering a deep slash reaching from his right shoulder all the way down to his left hip. The wound was burning and deep enough to be a serious threat to his life, but Vader had managed to get away fast enough to not be completely bisected. Yoda, as a Jedi, might be able to immerse himself in a rare kind of battle mediation, in order to temporarily shrug off full pain, and push his body to its limits, though he had attained multiple injuries from the glass shards. But even he could only ignore his limb being cut off for so long. Eventually his concentration was broken and the pain together with the grief over the death of his comrades, and the worry about Windu crashed down on him. It was much the same with Vader. The euphoria and adrenaline from being challenged in a fight were fading rapidly, as the agonizing pain of his wound hit him. The difference between the two, however, was that Yoda was being weakened by his pain. Vader was not. On the contrary, the Sith drew his strength from pain and suffering, be it from his victims or from himself. The pain made him furious, and the dark side sang and celebrated around him. "Oh, you will pay for that," Vader growled. He was crouching on the ground, now reaching with his hand in Yoda's direction in his signature move. Too weakened from the duel, Yoda could do nothing when he was lifted into the air by an iron grip around his throat. Normally Vader would squeeze slowly, enjoying the look of panic on his victim's face as the life slowly left them. This time, however, he was just too angry. Instead he applied all the force he could, aiming to snap the tiny being's neck. Yoda struggled in his grip, utilizing the light side to battle Vader's will. This wasn't a question of who was more skillful. It didn't matter who had the most experience, creativity or training. This was merely a question of who was more powerful in terms of the Force. And right now there was nobody in the galaxy who could hold a candle to Darth Vader in terms of power. With a sickening crunch, Yoda's spine snapped. Windu shouted out in denial and anger. A strong pulse went through the Force as the spirit of the Little Master joined the Force, and Vader let out a dissatisfied sound when his grip dissipated, empty robes falling to the ground where a crumbled body should have been. At once, the whole galaxy seemed to become just a tad bit darker as one of its brightest lights was snuffed out. Vader straightened his back, panting heavily and gritting his teeth so he wouldn't cry out in pain. He pierced Windu with an icy stare who sported a look of defiance, yet resignation. Slowly Vader stepped towards him. The emotions were swirling too strongly within him. He didn't even bother with any mocking last words. With 2 quick strikes of his lightsaber, he freed the Jedi from the hold of the wires, by cutting off both his arms. Ignoring the shout of pain, he turned towards the rest of the droids. "Get him in a high-security cell," he barked. "Set up a press release in the morning that Jedi Master Mace Windu is to be executed in 3 days for high treason and attempted assassination of the Emperor. Prepare me some new rooms," and he coughed violently, spitting blood and suppressing another groan at the throbbing pain in his chest. "And get me a dang medic, fast." "Roger, roger, sir," the droids called out. 5 of them secured the full form of Mace Windu, who threw him one last hateful glare. Vader cursed the stupid green gnome. While his wound was not lethal, it would need time to heal. Time he didn't have. It was always dangerous to keep a master such as Windu in prison for too long, especially since he didn't have the same accommodations on the Executor as here on the planet. He was expecting Anakin to show up soon. With some luck the execution would lure him here to a time and place of his choosing. He did not fancy being surprised without a guard and in the middle of the night yet again, not while being so grievously wounded. Mentally Vader went over his plan again. He could postpone the execution to give himself more time to heal, but that would run the risk of having Mace escape. No, that must not happen. He would just have to grit his teeth. Anakin must not know of his injured state. He must not show weakness to nobody. He was the Emperor of the Galactic Empire. He was everything but weak. XXX. Anakin concentrated hard, stretching out his mind to encompass not only his own, but Obi-Wan's as well. His father had taught him how to shield his presence masterfully, so nobody, Force-sensitive or not, would pay him any mind. It was hard since he had to shield his former Jedi master as well. It made a deep connection to his mind necessary, one that let him feel all the anger and hatred, the frustration and helplessness. It was almost indiscernible where his emotions ended and Anakin's own began. "We should help him," Obi-Wan growled. His form was hidden under an enormous brown cloak, the mask laying in the shadows of a big hood. They were standing at the edge of the crowd, facing the stage on which Mace Windu was being dragged forward. "We can't help him," Anakin said darkly. "We lose the moment of surprise, and we have to fight both Vader and a small army of droids." He glared up at the figure standing on the balcony. "Together with Master Mace we could." "No," Anakin cut him off. "Search your feelings, Master. My father has taken away his Force powers. He would be of no help to us." Obi-Wan turned his masked face to him slowly. "He can do that." Anakin nodded. "It's how he managed to imprison Sidious. It's temporary but lasts long enough that he won't be able to help us." He eyed the broken form of the Jedi Master with pity, taking note of the stumps where his arms used to be. "Especially not like that." Obi-Wan didn't insist. When they had heard on the news that Yoda and a small group of masters had tried to assassinate the Emperor and been executed for it, it had been a shock. It wasn't that they were overly sad about their demise. Obi-Wan still struggled with the maelstrom of hatred and anger within him that allowed no positive emotion to anyone. It took him a great deal of effort to endure Anakin's presence without lashing out, even though they had been as close as brothers for a time. He latched quite desperately onto that bond, but there were moments when not even that mattered. Certainly he had no capability to care for someone who had been little more than a colleague to him. Anakin on the other hand never really liked Mace Windu, the Master having been one of the most insistent that he shouldn't have been admitted to the Order, that she should be restrained, punished or held back. It was similar with the other Masters. That's why there had been no sadness but simply shock that the people they had always thought the strongest in the Force, the council members of the Jedi Order, would be defeated by Darth Vader. It made it all the more obvious what had happened to the Order, and that it was all but destroyed. So they did nothing as Vader gave the command to the firing squad, and a moment later Mace Windu crumbled to the ground, dead. Anakin turned away. "Let's go." The execution had only been announced in the morning. When Anakin and Obi-Wan had heard about the death of the Masters, they had decided it was time to travel to Coruscant and end it all. If they had come just a bit earlier they might have been able to think up a rescue plan, but as it was too late. There was the lingering question what chance they had against Darth Vader with their teamwork all but non-existent during to their clashing presences, with so many issues to be worked out between them that there was little trust. If 5 Jedi Master hadn't been able to defeat him then how could they hope to do it? Anakin's Force sensitivity had returned fully at last. He had been trained by his father, he knew how he fought. Sometimes he had been able to defeat him in their sparring matches. Not often, mind you, but now he had Obi-Wan to back him up. He could only hope that it would be enough. It had to be enough. Vader was his father, his responsibility, and he owed it to the galaxy to stop him. The 2 Force users got out of the crowd and hid themselves until the activity in the area died down. In the evening they infiltrated the skyscraper Vader had chosen as his current seat of power. They disabled one of the elevators and climbed up the shaft to avoid detection. They need not have bothered. Getting out on the level Vader's dark presence was strongest on, the duo met no resistance. There were no droids patrolling the corridors, no clones standing guard. The entire floor was utterly deserted. "I have a bad feeling about this," Obi-Wan muttered. "You tell me about it," Anakin returned. He couldn't say that he was surprised. Evidently his father knew he was here or was at least expecting him. The whole war had never been about the Sith or the Jedi, never been about the Republic or the Empire. It had always been about Vader and his family, and though there was a lot of animosity between father and son these times, Anakin knew that the Sith respected him. He would not lure him into trap, insulting him by sending droids, clones or other cannon fodder at him. No, his father would meet him head-on. Thus Anakin didn't hesitate as he made his way to some grand double doors at the end of the last corridor. Secrecy was no longer necessary. The lack of guards proved his father knew he was here. His suspicions were confirmed as the doors swung open at a wave of his hand. The lights flickered on suddenly, revealing a vast room that was completely empty, except for one lone throne-like chair at the very end. On this chair Darth Vader sat, regarding the duo casually over the tips of his fingers folded under his chin. Anakin could feel the hatred and fear suddenly spike in Obi-Wan, so he held up a hand, stopping him from rushing forward. Anakin Skywalker, the voice of the Sith Lord, echoed through the vast room. So you have come at last. Have you returned to take your rightful place at my side? I don't belong at your side, Anakin whispered, the words only heard by senses reinforced by the Force. I never did. Vader sneered. You do not belong anywhere. Belonging would imply there to be a being higher than you, determining how you have to live your life. But you are a Skywalker. You make your own fate, you write your own story. I am offering you to rule by my side. The choice is entirely up to you. Do not excuse your weakness and fear of power with something as ridiculous as fate. I wanted to be together with you. Anakin cried out, taking a few steps forward. I wanted to make a difference, to build up something with you. But not an empire. I never wanted to rule over anybody. The Republic might have been weak and ineffective. And yes, maybe we need someone stronger and more determined to lead everyone. But that someone is not me, and it certainly is not you either. Then who is? Vader challenged. I can tell you exactly how the Empire would look with, say, Darth Sidious at its top. There would be order, there would be ultimate control, but there would also be crime and slavery on the less useful worlds. There would be bloody rebellions and entire planets destroyed to spread fear and force submission. Any of your beloved Jedi or senators, however, if put in the same position, would only insist on sharing the power, making the entire point moot. I have a vision of how this galaxy should look like, and I will see it come to fruition. And what about your family? Anakin tried, desperation gripping his heart. Neither Pat nor me will stand for this. You have forced Mother to take up a role she never wanted. You thought you'd do her a favor, but have you ever asked her what she wants? You think you know what's best for everyone, but what you're really doing is take away every choice and free will we have. Oh silly boy, if only you knew. Without me, your wife would be dead. You would have to suffer unimaginable pain at the hands of the Jedi I protected you from. Your children would grow up apart from you, being raised by your enemies to hate you, be shaped into weapons to destroy you. You have no idea how I have done for you. Enough of this. Obi-Wan called out, igniting his red lightsaber with a snap hiss. You will resign from your position, Vader. You will reinstate the Republic and leave this galaxy. You will be exiled to the unknown regions, or else I swear I will make you regret you ever let me live. Vader stood abruptly, all pretense of calmness gone. How dare you, he spat, fury and hatred spiking and making Anakin wince, as he was hit with an echo of the emotions through their bond. You sniveling, pathetic worm. Have I not taught you to respect your betters? Look how you have fallen, becoming the exact thing you swore to destroy. You dare to challenge me. Any hope of reaching a peaceful conclusion was shattered when Vader raised his hand, lifting up the Jedi Master with the Force. I have killed Master Yoda. Him and his little merry band of assassins. I survived no less than 5 Jedi Masters more powerful than you teaming up against me. Do you really think you have any chance to defeat me? Obi-Wan, no. Anakin cried out. He tried stepping in front of his master, but it did absolutely nothing to help the Jedi. He made no noise as his trembling form hung in the air, but through their connection, Anakin felt his immense pain as Vader pressed on his breathing apparatus. Father, stop it. He all but pleaded. Vader merely narrowed his eyes, cold and yellow from the dark side. No, he said simply. Something in him snapped and Anakin rushed forward with a furious cry. He had to disrupt Vader's concentration, had to stop him from hurting his master. Their lightsabers clashed, both pressing at the other with unrelenting force. Fury and fear was fueling Anakin's strength as he continued to attack, but Vader's hold over Obi-Wan impossibly stayed strong. The young man shouted out another war cry, using a powerful force push to disrupt his opponent's balance. At last Vader's concentration broke and Obi-Wan fell to the ground limply. Anakin could still feel his waning life at the edge of his conscience, but the Jedi wasn't moving. Now driven by desperation, knowing his master would die if he lost the duel, he directed strong waves of power at Vader, who deflected them with some effort. Yes, Anakin, Vader practically purred, regarding his son with a predatory look. You have become powerful. You are ready. Your madness will end here, Father. I won't allow you to hurt Obi-Wan or anyone else anymore. We will see about that, he answered. Fast as lighting his saber came down, a bright red arc that threatened to take off Anakin's head. The Jedi barely had time to raise his own blade, but had to jump back anyway, at the unexpected strength behind the blow. Vader felt his hesitance, his fear and conflict, and it made him angry. You are so full of dark feelings. He called out, but you don't use them. The darkness will come to you either way, you have to accept it in order to stay true to yourself. Anakin attacked again, but Vader blocked his strike with barely any effort. A powerful kick sent him tumbling to the ground, but the Jedi was back on his feet in a moment. You will never defeat me if you don't reach for this power, he lectured. The dark side is the fast and easy way to power, Anakin muttered. But it's all an illusion. Maybe so, Vader admitted. Maybe you could become just as powerful or even more so than me if you trained a couple of more decades. But think about it, Anakin. Do you have that time? Darth Vader reached for the Force, calling it to him, and used the pressure to bring his younger self to his knees. Anakin cried out in pain as he was forced to bow. His fear and desperation was surrounding him like a thick mist. For a couple of seconds he trembled, just kneeling there. And then he reached out. Vader could feel it like a tug at his heart. The darkness surrounding him vibrated as it was suddenly pulled into a different direction. Anakin took a deep breath and he calmed down, his desperation and anger flowing into the dark side, feeding it, but not his fear. It remained with him, doubling in intensity as the dark side began to cling to him. When the Jedi stood again, his eyes were piercing yellow. "Yes," Vader whispered, "just like that. Come at me." And he came. His strikes were 3 times as powerful as before, and he didn't tire at all. He held against it as Vader tried to push him away. He was still afraid, outright terrified, for some reason refusing to let go of that feeling. Vader didn't understand it. He didn't remember ever being that afraid of death. The Sith Lord winced, his arms trembling as he blocked a particular strong blow. The blade didn't touch him, but still there was suddenly a dark patch growing on his robes. Anakin moved back for a moment, irritated. Then his eyes lit up in realization. Vader was panting heavily, even though the duel hadn't lasted that long. It was obvious now that he was injured. Anger was added to the mix of emotions swirling inside of Anakin, as he was reminded of the fight his father had received that wound, and most likely, because of him, the Jedi Masters were dead. The young man attacked with new fervor, intent on not letting their sacrifice be in vain, of using the advantage they had given him. This time it was Vader who was being pushed back, who had trouble breathing as his son's presence grew stronger and stronger. He engaged him with his lightsaber again, but he was slowly losing the upper hand. There was no furniture in the room to use, not even a window to shatter, nothing he could use to flaunt his superior presence in the Force. The environment he had chosen proved to be a serious disadvantage to Vader. Suddenly a powerful strike of Anakin knocked Vader back, and his lightsaber flew away, out of reach. He cried out in pain as he hit the ground, his wound opening again and seeping blood through his clothing. He was forced to remain on the ground looking up at his younger self. "You have become so strong," he said, bitter but still with a definite hint of pride that made Anakin gag. "You're sick, father. Your madness isn't leading anywhere." "Oh, but it does." He laughed quietly. "It leads straight to you. I will never become like you." "Wrong again, my son. You and me, we're already the same." "No?" Anakin cried out and jumped forward. The blade of his blue lightsaber stopped just an inch from Vader's throat. The Sith Lord looked up at him calmly. The moment stretched. "What are you waiting for?" He tilted his head curiously at the fear he still felt rolling off him. "The Republic has fallen. The clones are mine to command. The Jedi are letterless and in hiding. You have no army. You can't just arrest or exile me. I am the Emperor. You have to strike me down. It's your only chance to save your beloved democracy." The blade trembled, coming dangerously close to his throat. "Do it. Strike me down. What are you waiting for, coward?" Fear and anger and love and pain were battling within Anakin. He knew this was it, the moment of his choice. He was the only one who could make the decision on who he wanted to be. He could spare his father, potentially dooming the galaxy to decades of tyranny at his hand, or he could strike down his own father, running the risk of falling to the dark side himself. Nobody could force him to do one thing or the other. Nobody could tell him which one was the right choice. The decision was entirely his. The fate of the galaxy lay in his hands. And it terrified him. All his fear and anger and desperation were released in one moment, as Anakin raised his lightsaber with a shout, and the blue blade whirling around in a wide arc. Light ending. All his fear and anger and desperation were released in one moment, as Anakin raised his lightsaber with a shout, the blue blade whirling around in a wide arc, and then suddenly there was a loud clank as the weapon hit the ground. Anakin had thrown it wide away from him. I can't." The desperation returned tenfold as the former Jedi stepped back and pushed against the darkness residing in him. Incredulously, Vader looked up only to see that Anakin's eyes were blue once again, tears running down his face. "What?" he let out, barely holding back an angry growl. "Of course you can." "No, I won't. You can't make me." For a moment Vader was convinced he had misheard. Why the heck not? His plan had been perfect. Anakin would kill him, bring back the light and fulfill that awful prophecy. He would be the hero and have so much influence in what little remained of the Jedi Order, that he would be able to rebuild it to his own liking, without the need to hide his relationship with Padme any longer. It was a perfect ending. Vader would gladly sacrifice himself for this future. He had reached every goal he had set himself in this life anyway. It was now his time to go. I can't kill you. You're my father. I won't fight you any longer." Anakin all but sobbed. Vader stared at him incomprehensibly. He had a suddenly memory flash of his son Luke, saying the exact same thing to him almost 17 years ago. It was hilarious. There was something rising in his chest. A smile formed on Vader's lips, broadening into a grin, and suddenly it broke out of him, a high-pitched, mad laughter. Anakin looked at him stunned, humiliation mixing with his fear that he only now realized wasn't for his own life, but for the deed he had to perform. Still the desperation was driven away by determination, and Anakin straightened his back, unwilling to give in. "Oh, Skywalker," Vader managed to get out. He hadn't had such a good laugh since he had been a Skywalker himself. "You're still such a child. I can't believe you still haven't figured it out." "Figured what out?" Anakin asked as he slowly stepped back, absent-mindedly calling for his lightsaber, which immediately came flying into his awaiting hand. Anakin, he said, still fighting a chuckle because this was like Bespin and at the same time, it wasn't. I'm not your father. Anakin stared at him with the same incredulous shock as Luke had for the first few moments before the truth had sunken in. What? I never ever touched Shmai, Vader elaborated. You don't have a father, Anakin. You were quite literally spawned by midi-chlorians. I knew how powerful you would become. I knew what an important role you would play. I thought I could make use of you. That's not true, you're lying. Mother. Your mother played along because it was a convenient cover story to explain my presence. She does love me, just like she loves you, but not in a romantic way. But we look so much alike. The Force, all of my talents, piloting, repairing, fighting, we even have the same favorite dishes. How could all of that be a coincidence? Oh, it isn't. You are right that we are very much alike. A little bit too much, haven't you ever wondered? That's because we are the same. You are me and I am you. Our DNA is a perfect match. I am merely a few years older than you. No, Anakin muttered, stepping back from him in horror. It can't be. I am a clone. Vader felt like banging his head against the next wall. Hard. How could any version of himself be so stupid? No, you incredible idiot. Time travel. I'm your future self, you fool. That can't be, Anakin answered. Time travel is impossible, and just in case someone invents it, there are laws forbidding it. Everything is possible with the Force and stars. I'm the God dang Emperor, I make the law. But, I would never do the things you did. I'm from an alternate timeline, Vader said, rolling his eyes. In my version, I fell for Palpatine's trap and wiped out the Jedi myself. I still failed to save Padme, so there wasn't much to do besides helping Sidious to build up his empire. Anakin's eyes widened. He remembered how his father had told him he'd once lost the love of his life long before meeting Shmai, that he killed her himself when the dark side took him over. He remembered the stories of the war his father had told him as a child, when there had been peace in the Republic for a long time. Then there were all those instances where Vader seemed to just be one step ahead of everybody. Everyone had thought he was simply that good in using the Force and deciphering the future, but what if he actually knew? Search your feelings, Anakin, Vader mocked. You know it to be true. But you knew all along what Sidious was planning. You knew of Order 66, and yet you let it happen. I did change the programming so the order could only be given by me. However, since we are the same, Sidious was able to use you to execute it instead, which was admittedly something I had not foreseen. I never intended to wipe out the Jedi, but it was a possibility that I wanted to remain open for me, just in case the Empire was founded after all. You founded the Empire. It was necessary in the current political climate. I have declared you my heir. Had you killed me, you would have been in the perfect position to shape the Empire into a perfect world together with your wife. Or you could just destroy what I've built, depict me as a demon, and make the free people appreciate the democracy anew. Since all the senators are dead or in hiding, you would have been able to replace them with non-corrupt ones, and thus make this world a better place. Alas, he said and slowly got to his feet again, calling his lightsaber to him. I see that is not going to happen anymore. Anakin shook his head, still disbelieving. How can you possibly be me? Obi-Wan. Oh yes, Kenobi, Vader said, nodding. The thrice-dang traitor. He cost me everything I had the last time around. I was your age when I left the Jedi Order. They had tried to assassinate the Chancellor, and I went to protect him. The Jedi were rebelling, and I chose to side with Sidious, and I killed all the Jedi I found in the temple, men, women and children. It was necessary in order to let the dark side grow in me. I executed the leaders of the Separatists to end the war. After that I was powerful enough in the dark side, so that together with Sidious, I would have been able to save Padme. Before I could attempt this though, Kenobi confronted me. He mutilated me, left me in a poisonous environment, burning in a pit of lava. He didn't even have the decency to finish me off. I was forced to live in that dang life support suit for the rest of my life. Because of this I was unable to save my wife. She died and Kenobi stole my children, leaving me in the belief they had died. He separated the twins, forced Luke to grow up on Tatooine, which always remained a dangerous planet ruled by criminals, and plagued by sand people who also killed our mother, by the way. He raised a boy to think I, Darth Vader, had killed his noble Jedi father. He pitted a boy against me, teaching him he had to kill me without even telling him the truth about his origin. My daughter too was raised to be an enemy of the Empire. I tortured her never knowing who she was. If it weren't for Kenobi I would have overthrown the Emperor within a week, and my children would have been royalty. Instead they were raised to hate me, and it is all his fault. Now tell me, knowing all this, can't you understand why I had to bring some galactic justice down on him? Anakin could see it. By the Force, he could see it. Anakin could forgive his master a lot. He could forgive that he turned dark, that he tried to kill him, kill innocents, even kill his father. But he knew he could never forgive it if he took away his wife or children from him. We are really the same, he whispered, shocked and horrified. That's right, we are the same. But then again we are not. You have gone away much different from mine. You have never gone through the same time of losing your loved ones. You have seen war but you haven't suffered. You know nothing of true pain, and this means you know nothing of the dark side. That has clearly been proven by your inability to fight me. Vader was stepping forward, still holding his throbbing wound with one hand. Anakin stepped back the same distance warily. What does that mean? He wanted to know. What is going to happen now? I have no idea, Vader shrugged. I'm not Sidious, I haven't planned that far ahead. But I have an empire to run and you, my heir, have a Jedi order to return to. Anakin's expression turned dark. The Jedi will not accept my return. They won't have much of a choice. There's nobody left to lead them. The last council members that survived Order 66 were executed by me. There were only a couple of knights left guarding the younglings and Padawans. I will send you as my official representative to bring them back to the temple. I'm sure Ahsoka and Qui-Gon will be delighted to help you out rebuilding the order to your own liking. You can expel everyone who protests. For those under your protection, I promise no harm will come to them. You will allow the Jedi to continue to exist? Anakin asked skeptically. To a certain extent, yes. They will answer only to you and you will answer to me. Since their number is greatly diminished, I do believe there's enough space in the temple to house my own order as well. The acolytes will join you. You can get Ahsoka to brief you. There can be general classes until the younglings reach the Padawan rank. Then they will be assigned to a master to learn either about the light or the dark side of the Force. That is the essence of the new order, that Jedi and Sith live together peacefully. Some might even grow to learn to control both sides. During my last time I brought balance to the Force by destroying Jedi and Sith alike. This time I intend to do it by making them both equally strong. It will never work, they're too different. It works between us, doesn't it? Vader challenged. Either you do as I say or I will command my apprentices to wipe out what's left of your precious order. You have the choice. Anakin looked away, biting his lips. What about Obi-Wan? He asked at last. He is under my protection too. Vader visibly struggled with himself. He hasn't done any of the things you talked about. He's a completely different person now, his younger self argued. He will never be free of the dark side, Vader said. It is rooted too deeply in his soul. I would have to teach him how to control it. I very much doubt he would manage not to provoke me to the point that I had to kill him. But if he does survive the training he may live. Under one condition. Anakin struggled with the words. He didn't like that his master was to become a Sith, but he also remembered his father's early lessons about the difference of controlling the dark side, and letting the dark side control him. Maul and Firal were a lot more civil and in control than Obi-Wan right now. What is the condition? He wanted to know. Vader scowled darkly. Under no circumstances is he to bleach my armor white. XXX. Darth Vader remained Emperor of the Galaxy. He replaced almost the entire Senate. Quite a number of times the newly elected senators were promptly thrown out by him again. The Sith got in the habit of meeting with every new senator in person, invading his or her mind, and seeing for himself if they got their position because of hard work and an actual desire to serve their people, or if they got there through money, connections or stars forbid, sleeping their way up. Vader held his promise in treating former Republic and Separatist worlds equally. He had no qualms taking his fleet and terrorizing those that made trouble, and together with the Sith, there were few who could stand in his way. However, fact remained that while Vader very much enjoyed leading people to battle, he had little to no interest in politics. The Senate actually gained back power under his rule, considering Palpatine had made excessive use of his emergency powers to make them practically redundant. The senators were now in charge of making the laws once again. Every bill had to pass Vader's examination. Sometimes he would make a law himself, but they were rough drafts. In order to force the Senate to decide quickly, he usually included some aspect or another in the bills that made them unacceptable for certain Democratic representatives. If they did not succeed in finding some common ground, the bill would pass in its original state after a certain time. It was not easy, including points that would pee off representatives from numerous oppositions, so they would be forced to work together and find a compromise. But Vader soon assembled a team of aides and advisors that he trusted, and frequently brainwashed, to help him with it. Padme Amidala, now Padme Skywalker, did not return to office. She remained on Coruscant as an advisor, and Anakin moved back into the Jedi Temple. The base of the Sith Academy was relocated there as well. Instead of a council, the new institution had three leaders: Maul as representative of the dark side, Qui-Gon as representative of the light side, and Anakin as a representative and connection to the Empire. Though it was a formality with how few Force users remained, Anakin now held the title of Master. Their trinity ensured that there would never be any indecisiveness, no arguing between two clashing sides that wasted time better to be used for action. Ahsoka and Qui-Gon went to approach the remaining Jedi, spreading the word about the new order, and recruiting several knights and Padawans. Several others though cursed them, called them traitors, and refused to work together with the Sith. 1 week later, under Vader's orders, the new senator for that world was being elected. Firal came with a small fleet, declaring that the younglings and Padawans who were underage and without a master were to be brought to the temple, as the remaining Jedi were too few and not fit to take care of them all. Without the support of the locals and fearing annihilation by the hands of the Sith and his fleet, the Jedi surrendered. Firal took the children with him but left the rest of the Jedi. Over the next decade, those children would slowly get used to the new order. They would find friends amongst the acolytes, and realize that maybe they weren't so different after all. Under their combined rule, the new order thrived and grew. They were taking the role the Jedi originally was supposed to have. To help the government to settle disputes on various planets peacefully. The ability to see the future and sense danger, something in which Qui-Gon, due to being partly one with the Force, especially excelled in, enabled them to know exactly when it was appropriate to send a Jedi to clear up a misunderstanding, calm some worries or find some compromise, and when it was more efficient to send a Sith who would utilize threats, aggressive negotiations, assassination or make heavy use of mental attacks and interrogation during an investigation. Everyone was glad and relieved when the Jedi came, as they knew things would get better for them. Those that had committed some crime or were taking part in a conspiracy, though, feared the arrival of the Sith, who would ruthlessly crush their plans, and if they were feeling sadistic, their windpipes as well. Luke and Leah Skywalker grew up together. They lived together with their mother in her apartment on Coruscant. Anakin came home to them as often as he could. Through his work demanded he spend a night at the temple often as well. Sometimes Padme would take the children with her to work to the Senate. It was something Vader insisted on when he was on the planet, and he was thoroughly enjoying the time he got to spend with his children. At first Padme hadn't wanted to let him anywhere near them, but between Anakin's resignation and Vader's offer to take her into his team of advisors, they prepared the first drafts of the bills, so she could personally see to that the democracy didn't die. She had eventually relented under the condition that he was never to use the Force around them. The only one that Anakin told about his peculiar relationship with his father was Obi-Wan. The former Jedi, now officially Sith, had been less than thrilled in hearing the deal Anakin had made to save him. Telling him had really been the only choice. Anakin was the last threat that held Obi-Wan in the light, and he wanted with all his mind to keep it. Learning that he would once, under different circumstances, torture his brother like that, it opened his eyes to what he had become, and what he really didn't want to be. The first lesson Vader had to reteach Kenobi was patience. He sent him to psychological therapy for a full year. The cyborg was sent to teach younglings in neutral subjects such as math and languages, so as to not give him an incentive to throw any more tantrums. But Vader turned out to be right. Even after all this time, the dark side continued to cling to him. Thus Vader began to take him with him on his travels. Some were of diplomatic nature, some were violent, and while they rarely fought together, Vader invested much time in leading him through mediation, and showing him how to feed only certain emotions to the dark side, and prevent it from controlling you. It was during this time that he realized he was rooted in the dark himself farther than he had ever intended. His inner balance was disturbed, but over years of mediation, working with his son and playing with his children, he relearned the lessons he was giving the Jedi. 5 years later, Luke and Leah entered the Force Academy. They proved to have a great talent, but still had a long way to go. The galaxy was at peace. The Jedi who had not joined the New Order were keeping quiet. The Empire was very efficient in keeping the worlds under control. The economy thrived, many poor planets were being rebuilt, and there was a presence large enough in the outer rim to ensure there was noticeably less crime and smuggling, and no slavery at all anymore. The Empire still had its enemies, but they were never so strong or so many to pose a real threat. Darth Vader was a respected man and for many, even a beloved ruler. That was why it came as a surprise to many when after only 5 years, the Sith Lord retired. Rumors said he offered his son to take over after him, but Anakin refused. Instead of having a new emperor elected, Vader chose to promote his team of advisors, making it into an official institution. For the future, the governmental head of the New Order was being placed in charge of appointing the members of that team, with the limitation that they had to belong to different parties. Seeing as he had so much work to do and also not wanting to pick one twin over the other, Anakin trained neither of his children. Leah was chosen by Ahsoka to be her Padawan, and Luke, surprisingly, was taken in by Firo. The boy learned his fair share of techniques reserved for the dark side, but whenever there was time, he would also often take private lessons from Qui-Gon or his father, learning more about the light. Combined with Firo's more practical streak, he quickly grew proficient with the Force, the lightsaber, various other weapons, and of course he was growing to be an expert pilot. Vader was proud to note that when his training was complete, he would be as powerful as he and Anakin combined. After retiring, Vader returned to the temple. The last couple of years had been exhausting, and he had no qualms about leaving Maul in charge of the Order. He actually enjoyed teaching for a time and eventually took on an apprentice himself, a young boy named Galen. It was during that time that he stumbled over Bells again, who had expertly forged and hacked her way into being admitted as a technician supervising the communication system of the temple. As had been commanded by him, she had gone to a public school. Though Vader had continued to pay for her education, he had rarely ever checked up on her. Truth to be told, her admiration for him made him a bit uncomfortable as he felt he didn't deserve such love. The girl was quite desperate for his approval, and had worked hard to only get top marks in everything. The fact that he rarely acknowledged her only made her work harder. But over the last couple of years, Vader had found peace for himself. When he saw that the girl, as soon as she was 16 and allowed to live on her own, had chosen to search him out, he didn't have it in him to leave her on her own. He employed her as a co-pilot on his various travels with his apprentice around the world, and over time he developed a bond to her that was rivaling the one to his apprentice in strength, which, given that she wasn't force-sensitive, did mean something. Obi-Wan remained in the New Order, but stayed away from active duty after Vader declared his training complete. He spent his time teaching the younger recruits or finding new ones on the more dangerous planets. He could never quite trust himself to take part in any bloody fighting, but working with children helped him to heal, and gave him the feeling he did something good. Under Padme's and Anakin's guidance, the galaxy experienced a golden age. When Ahsoka was old and experienced enough, she took over Qui-Gon's position, as it wouldn't do to have a dead man leading the Order forever. Far in the future, Luke would succeed his father in the same manner. Maul had already taken a liking to Galen, and began to train him to be his successor, after Vader declared him ready to ascend to the assassin rank, the dark equivalent of the Jedi Knight. In old age, Vader moved to Naboo, where he spent a lot of time mediating and connecting to the Force. He was often visited by his family, by Padme, Anakin, Luke and Leah, but also by Maul, Furl, Galen and of course Bells. He would see one of them at least once a week, and never did he feel alone. When he finally did die, he was greeted by his old friend Qui-Gon. That was some adventure, wasn't it? The old Jedi asked with a smile. The greatest one, Vader agreed, proud of what they had accomplished and happy that it had all turned out so well. Are you ready for the next one? Vader made a face. I'm not being sent back in time again, am I? No, my friend. You are not going back in time, you are going back into your own world. Vader stared at him. What? You can't mean that. I already fulfilled the dang prophecy in that time. Granted, I did it by killing everyone, but it's the same. I have done my duty. Yes, you did. And then you went back and did it again, without even having to. There is balance once again in this world as well, with Jedi and Sith living together peacefully for the first time in history. You have done well beyond any expectations, so well you can be trusted to do it again. While in your original world, there are no Jedi and no Sith anymore, there is still your son following the light side, recruiting others, and there are still the Emperor's hands, following the darkness. Darth Sidious's reign has ended, but the Empire is still in a state of chaos. You could help to rebuild it like you have done here. Vader's expression grew stony. No, he said resolutely. I mean no disrespect, I very much enjoyed my second chance, and I'm glad I was given it. But it was as exhausting as it was fulfilling. Without the guidance of the Force, I have lost my way many times. I don't think I could do much good if I return now. I have seen Luke and Leah grow up. Luke is far more powerful than I ever was, he mastered both the light and the dark side. And Leah, though more passionate and practical, still has much of her mother in her. Even without proper training, I know that if these two work together, they can do anything. They don't need my help. I have decided to leave the galaxy in the hands of my children the moment I attacked Sidious all those decades ago. It was the right decision and I still don't regret it. I will not go back. Qui-Gon nodded. I had suspected that you would say this. Still, you deserve to make the decision on your own. The old Jedi averted his eyes, looking into the distance. I have watched over this generation for many decades. I feel tired myself. Then let's find out what the Force has to offer us together. Qui-Gon smiled, and for a moment their minds brushed against each other, sharing the pride and satisfaction about seeing this world grow. It is time for us to move on. Dark ending. All his fear and anger and desperation were released in one moment, as Anakin raised his lightsaber with a shout, the blue blade whirling round in a wide arc, and rushed down onto the unmoving form of Darth Vader. The Sith gave no cry of pain, no sound of protest. His voice was forever silenced as the blade came down on him. Anakin stood over the lifeless body of his father. His lightsaber had stabbed right through his heart, killing him far quicker than maybe he deserved. His eyes were staring at the ceiling now, empty. Just as empty as Anakin felt in that moment, with nothing but dark power to fill the hole. He had to do it, he tried to tell himself. It had been long since overdue. It was the only way. Anakin looked back at the unconscious form of his master. It was surreal. He was the last man standing in a vast empty space. There was no applause, no army rushing in that he had to fight his way through, nothing. But the Anakin stepped forward and used the Force to lift up the Jedi Master. He carried him all the way down through the building, and still there was no security coming to arrest him. The young man felt as if he was in a trance as he entered his transport. They had already entered hyperspace when Obi-Wan finally woke up. What happened? He wanted to know once he had realized where he was. The Emperor is dead, Anakin said tonelessly. We're on our way back to Tatooine. Vader is dead. Obi-Wan sank back in his seat, his helmet meeting the wall with a metallic sound. Good riddance. XXX. Darth Vader found himself floating in a white landscape without ground and without horizon. He was surrounded by thick white mist. Realizing he was most certainly dead, Vader unconsciously searched for any blue Force ghost to meet him. Instead, he noticed distinct shapes forming in the mist. He could make out vague faces, some human, some not, some smiling, some crying, some twisted in anger, some peaceful and serene. There were the thousand faces of the living Force, whispering all at once, an indiscernible buzzing in his ear. The rush of the battle dying, Darth Vader calmed down and a small smile grazed his lips. He He might be dead now, but his family was alive. Padme and the children were safe, as was his mother. Even his little Padawan Ahsoka had a promising future ahead of her. Sidious was dead, and he had repaid Obi-Wan for his betrayal. He had reached every goal he had set himself in this life. "Thank you," he said to the thousand faces. There was nothing else to say. This life had been a gift to him. The Force did not give him any hint if it was happy or sad about what he'd done with it. It was his choice, and the Force accepted it. Slowly Vader felt himself tire and his eyes closed. He felt his own mind dissipate. This time there would be nothing left of his identity in the netherworld. His spirit joined the Force, and his face became one of many in the swirling mist. XXX. Anakin and Obi-Wan barely talked on their way back. Anakin couldn't help but think how easy it had been. His father had wanted him to kill him. That made him furious. How was he to prove that he had overcome the man? How could he prove his strength like this? He felt like having stepped into one last trap, played his role to end without ever glimpsing behind the curtain. He had won the match when his real enemy had been the Game Master. Back on Tatooine, Padme was relieved to have him back, but Anakin didn't react to her hug. He felt cold, so cold even her warmth couldn't reach him. When he told them what happened, she tried to cheer him up, not quite finding the right words. It was Shmi, though, who bore the strongest reaction. "Oh, Anakin," she said with such a look of desperation and sadness, "please tell me I have misheard. It cannot be true. You said you wanted to bring him back to the light. How could you do something like that?" Anakin's mouth was dry. He tried to kill Obi-Wan. I had to do it. But that was not true. He didn't have to, he'd had the choice. He had to be stopped. The young man called out, angry at his own thoughts. He would have enslaved the whole galaxy. He was mad with power. But to kill him. "Anakin, oh Ani, you have no idea what you've done. I did the right thing," he screamed, shaking off Padme when she tried to calm him. He was a monster. Shmi gave a sob. "You don't know what you're talking about, Ani. I loved him just like I love you. How could you do this to me, to you?" "I did it because I hate him," Anakin roared. "He always tried to manipulate me. He turned Qui-Gon, he hurt Obi-Wan, and he threatened to take my children from me. Everything bad I've ever done, I've done it because of him. Now I am finally free from his influence." Shmi couldn't answer anymore. She had sunken on a chair, her face buried in her hands as she sobbed and cried. Her grief only made Anakin even more angry. Dark power was curling round him, begging to lash out at the woman. It was only Padme's calming voice speaking to him that held him back. His wife led him away. Obi-Wan went to see a medic while the couple retired to their room. "I can't believe she's crying for that idiot," Anakin cursed when they were alone. He was sick, he was crazy, no better than Sidious. Still she loved him, Padme said very quietly. Anakin turned towards her, and the woman flinched back when she saw the yellow in his eyes. Suddenly he was upon her, his intense glare piercing her as he held her with a strong grip. His lips crushed onto her mouth, and she gasped at the rough treatment, the fierce passion. "I've done it to protect you," he growled against her neck, planting a kiss across her throat. Her husband had always been a bit possessive, but this was too much. To protect everyone. His hands wandered under her dress, and Padme let out a whimper when he squeezed just a bit too hard. "Anakin, Anakin, please stop." She struggled in his grip until he let go of her with a growl. "What now? Are you going to judge me as well? You were the one who said you never wanted to let him anywhere near our family." "Yes, but Anakin, please, you're not yourself. Just calm down, you don't look well." "I am fine, thank you," he spat out. "Ani." But he swatted away the hand that reached out for him. "Maybe you should stay away from me for a while if you find me that disgusting," he sneered and abruptly left the room. Not even once had he asked to see his children. XXX. They stayed on Tatooine for 2 more days. Ahsoka had been called away before Anakin and Obi-Wan had returned, and the tension was thick between the 2 Force users and the women. Shmi was quite obviously grieving. Padme was refusing to let Anakin see the twins when his eyes had that disturbing color, thought that didn't make much of a difference, as her husband didn't seem all that interested in seeing them anyway. Instead he spent a lot of time with his former master, the only one who wholeheartedly supported him in his decision to end Darth Vader. They had a couple of sparring matches to get back in shape or vent their anger. On the 3rd day though, their routine was interrupted by a large group of droids marching up to the manor, led by General Tarkin, who Anakin knew from the Clone Wars. They were quite loudly announcing themselves, demanding to see Anakin Skywalker. "Danjit, how did they find us?" Anakin asked, peering through a window. He had quite a good idea what these people wanted here. "Ani, I am sorry," Shmi said, looking up behind him. "I called them. I can't go on like that. What mother, you betrayed me?" Anakin growled. In his anger his hand wandered to the hilt of his lightsaber immediately. "Ani, please. You have no idea what you've done to the galaxy. I had to do it, But Anakin had already drawn his lightsaber, the blade igniting just as the door was forcefully opened. The general entered and Anakin was ready to jump and behead him with one strike when unexpectedly the man gave a light bow to him. "Master Skywalker, sir, it is good to see you in good health. I am here on behalf of the Emperor to bring you back to Coruscant." "The Emperor is dead," Anakin snapped irritably. "I don't think he can command anything anymore." "That's right," Tarkin said, his gaze carefully passing over Shmi. However, your honorable mother has presented to us the last will and testament of your father. He has named you his heir, and as per the law of the Galactic Empire, this means you are to take his place on the throne. What? Anakin felt stumped. He had never expected that. Anakin, Shmai said, there is nobody left to bring peace and order back to the galaxy. All the senators and council members are either dead or in hiding. Your father may have lost himself during the last few years, but he had good plans for this galaxy. You are the only one who can fulfill his vision. Slowly Padme stepped forward as well. Your mother is right, Anakin. The war has burned out the people. The core worlds are facing financial ruin. The galaxy needs someone to settle the endless disputes and bring back stability. With no one to lead them, the separatist worlds will fall to the mercy of the capitalists, all fighting each other over territory and money. And the Outer Rim Tatooine, without the continued support of the rest of the galaxy, everything good that has been built up here will crumble again. Without anyone to protect them, criminal gangs will spring up everywhere, wearing each other over who gets to be the next Hutt. You're the only one seen as strong enough through the galaxy to take the Emperor's place. Tarkin cut in, looking quite sour that he had to admit it. Anakin didn't want to have anything to do with that title. But this position would give him all the power he needed to right the wrongs of his father, to make the galaxy the perfect place that he had always wished for his family. Alright, he said at last, I will go with you. XXX. Thus Anakin Skywalker became the new emperor. Padme and the children moved with him to Coruscant to help settle the state of new right the planet was in. His wife was very adamant in that he would use his power only to bring back stability, and then release it. But the more time passed, the more problems arose, and though a new Senate had been elected, he found it so much easier to just pass his bills himself, instead of waiting for those stupid politicians to finish their debates. Together the couple tried to get the poor Outer Rim planets the help they needed, which quickly caused the former separatist leaders to speak up, as the money was taken from their pockets. Never having liked those greedy idiots and having no real experience with economy issues, Anakin ordered their execution in a fit of anger. Padme wouldn't speak to him for days after that, and when he refused to apologize, eventually she took the children and moved to Naboo to her family. Anakin meant to give her the time she needed, instead focusing on the planets rising up in protest of the judgment. He sent out Obi-Wan with a small fleet to deal with them, and the Dark Jedi was all too eager to wipe out the separatist scum. Things went downhill from there. Darth Maul had taken over the new Sith Order, essentially conquered Malastare, and then launched an attack on the small planet Dagobah. At first Anakin had ignored what went on in that part of the galaxy, until he was informed that the remains of the Jedi Order had been hiding on Dagobah. Maul, Feral and a dozen of their best acolytes had killed every Master, Knight and Padawan they could find. The Order had been heavily damaged from the loss of the Council members and Master Yoda, and though it was a long and hard battle, eventually the Sith won. The majority of the Jedi in hiding, however, had been the younglings that had been saved from the temple. They were assimilated into the Sith Order, turned into recruits of their own. Ahsoka was being sent as a representative to try and work out an alliance between the Sith and the Empire, but with little to no success. The Zabraks refused to recognize Anakin as a leader, furious that he had dared to murder their master. They even spread propaganda, depicting Anakin as a traitor and murderer. Eventually Anakin snapped and drove his former Padawan away, forbidding her from ever coming to Coruscant again, as long as she was in cohorts with the Sith. A month later Obi-Wan raided the base on Malastare with a fleet of Star Destroyers. The Sith had long since relocated, but the Emperor's new right hand had no problem venting his anger on the population of the Dugs inhabiting the planet instead. Anakin rarely ever saw his family. When he did, Padme was cold and reserved, and never failed to ask how long he still planned on being Emperor. Years passed. Anakin missed Luke's first steps and Leah's first words. When he visited them he could feel their light shine so bright, and it hurt his senses that were clouded from the dark side. He had never managed to get rid of it ever since that day. 3 years after the declaration of the Empire, Padme told him she wanted to divorce. Anakin was so furious he used the Force to choke her, while Luke and Leah were sitting in a corner and crying. He tried to apologize afterwards, but Padme was afraid of him and she wanted him gone. He tried to appease her, but when he woke up in the morning he learned that she had packed her things, took the children and left the planet. Furious, Anakin organized a search for her, but she remained hidden. There was only one place that could shield her in such a way he wouldn't be able to find her or the bright presences of her children. Thus Anakin was convinced she was hiding with the Sith, and he doubled his efforts to find and wipe them out. Over the next 5 years, Maul organized a full-sized rebellion, an army with Dark Jedi and Sith acolytes as generals. Padme had indeed gone to the one person she trusted and felt would and could help her, which was Ahsoka. The Executor had lost more and more of her light, as she was forced to side with her cruel former master turned emperor or the Zabrak who had slaughtered the remaining Jedi, to further the strength of his own order. In the end she has stayed with Maul. She did believe that what Anakin was doing to the galaxy was bad, and it was her duty to fight with the rebellion, but above all she was unable to fight her growing feelings for the young Sith Lord. Meanwhile Obi-Wan Kenobi became the symbol of Anakin's hatred, spreading out chaos and destruction against his enemies, and hunting down the Sith. The Empire grew, but so did the rebellion. The new Sith Order was changing locations every few months, and there were many planets who supported them and offered their help. Whenever Anakin had found their base, they would already be gone before his fleet could reach them. At the same time, the Order would use hit and run tactics to wear out the Empire. They would strike precisely at their most important facilities and bases. What Anakin didn't know was that there was a little girl who had visited the Imperial Academy on Coruscant, a girl that was such a bright mind, a little genius really, that she was taken in with a special division of the Imperial Army, and work as a technician and spy. She was still very young, and so her security clearance wasn't very high, but she was often working on terminals that stored highly decoded secret information. It was ridiculously easy for Bells to overcome those securities, and she sent everything she found right to Darth Maul. Anakin had long since forgotten about the peculiar little girl he'd met on the Star Destroyer, and Bells made sure never to cross his path personally. She had no presence in the Force, and thus it was hard for Anakin to find her, even if he had considered searching for the leak in his security on such a low-level rank. Bells of course hated Emperor Skywalker fiercely for killing her master, that wonderful being she had felt an immediate connection to. She wanted him dead so badly, and that was why she did everything to help Darth Maul and provided him with information. There came a day when the Supreme Commander Kenobi conquered another planet formerly of Separatist allegiance, and in one of the destroyed old bases, they found the plans for a gigantic battle station. Kenobi brought the plans to the Emperor. Skywalker at first was unimpressed with the technological monster, but it had happened to him so often that a planet would fight off his fleet, the population essentially sacrificing themselves, in order to allow the Sith hiding amongst them to flee. He couldn't deny that it would be so much easier to wipe out his enemies, if he could jump out of hyperspace with that battle station, and just blast them all together. Thus the construction of the Death Star began. Luke and Leah Amidala grew up with their mother Padme. Their first few years were spent on the run, traveling with the rebels from one planet to the other. Padme didn't have the heart to tell her children her father wasn't with them because he was too busy running a tyranny. She told them that their father had been a Jedi, but that they had not been able to be together, because his order had forbidden it. She lied and told them she had left him without telling him she was pregnant, so as to not ruin his career, and now she didn't know where he was. It wasn't because their father didn't love them that he wasn't with them, he simply didn't know about them. As a result, the twins very much wanted to go out and find their father one day, and it frustrated them to no end that their mother wouldn't even tell them his name. When the twins became 10 years old, Maul approached Padme and insisted the twins be trained as Sith. They were more than old enough and they needed strong recruits. Padme refused. She had seen what the dark side had done to her husband, and she didn't want her children to use the Force at all. It almost caused a falling out between her and the rebels. In the end, Ahsoka found a compromise. The twins entered the Sith Academy and were taught by her and Qui-Gon's ghost, but were exempt from the Sith classes until they were at least 18, that was, legal adults. While Luke was doing fine, Leah with her passion showed a talent for the dark side, and as all her friends grew stronger using it, she was quickly frustrated with the limitation. She also began to resent her mother for refusing to tell her about her father, and using the Force she quickly realized that her mother was lying about not knowing where he was. In a fit of youthful rebellion, Leah left the Order. She tried to talk Luke into going with her, but the boy had developed a deep connection to the light side, and it whispered to him not to go. Leah went on her search alone, but just a few weeks later was captured by Imperials. They found out she was an acolyte of the New Order, and she was brought in front of the Supreme Commander Kenobi. He used the Force to invade her mind, torturing her, and found out about the location of the base as well as her origin. While the base once again was warned beforehand, Kenobi did bring Leah in front of the Emperor. Realizing that this was her father, Leah was quickly talked into taking her place as Imperial Princess and also Skywalker's student. Later, when Kenobi's injuries eventually caught up to him and he fell in a battle with Darth Maul, she took his place as a leader of the Imperial Army. In order to hide her youth so she wouldn't be given trouble by older generals, Leah disguised herself with a helmet that had been expertly crafted by Skywalker to allow her night vision, a breathing mask against poison and other things. In a show of galactic karma, 10 years later a green-eyed, young and attractive technician hacked into the Empire's most secret files, and managed to secure the plans of the recently finished Death Star. She had taken great risks in doing so, but what she didn't know was that it had been a trap set up for her. Leah was able to identify her as the spy, and the young woman was forced to flee. She managed to get the plans to a nearby rebel outpost, using a loyal little droid as messenger, but she herself was unfortunately captured. The outpost just so happened to have Luke Amidala in charge, who immediately took a liking to the beautiful girl depicted in the holographic call for help. He quickly formed a plan to rescue her, not knowing that on the Death Star where she was being held, the Emperor's new right hand, who was in fact his long-lost sister, was awaiting him. And the rest, they say, is history.